Yo, what's up everyone? It's The Fiction Wizard, and today we're checking out Gringotts Goblins performed emergency ritual on Harry at age 7, removed 15 soul shackles and declared war on Dumbledore. Drop a like if you're hyped. Subscribe for daily content. Let's get this story started. Chapter 1, The Dying Goblins. That the summer Dudley Dursley decided that Harry's ribs made a satisfying sound when kicked was the same summer everything changed. It was a Tuesday in July, the kind of day that pressed down on Surrey like a hot wet cloth, and Harry was in the garden pulling weeds because Uncle Vernon had decided the flower beds looked untidy and someone had to fix that, and it certainly wasn't going to be Vernon himself. Harry's knees were raw from the soil. His back ached in the particular way it did when he'd been at this for more than 2 hours. He was 7 years old and he weighed, according to the scale at school, 42 pounds. Which was not a normal weight for a 7-year-old, a fact the school nurse had noted twice in a letter that Aunt Petunia had intercepted and thrown away. He didn't think about being hungry anymore. Hunger had been a background hum for as long as he could remember, like the sound of the motorway 2 streets over. You stopped hearing it after a while. What he thought about, when he let himself think about anything at all, were the strange things that happened around him. The way the teacher's wig had turned blue once when she'd been particularly nasty. The way he'd ended up on the school roof after Dudley's gang had cornered him. Small, impossible things that frightened the Dursleys and made Uncle Vernon's face go the color of raw beef. He was on his 3rd row of weeds when the goblin fell over the garden wall. Harry's first thought was that it was some kind of animal, something that had dragged itself out of a gutter and taken a wrong turn. It hit the grass with a sound like a dropped sack of coins, all clatter and weight, and lay there breathing in long, wet pulls. Then it moved its head and Harry saw the face, angular and sharp, gray-green skin, ears that swept back like a bat's, eyes that were the dark amber of old whiskey. A goblin. Harry didn't know how he knew that. He just did, the same way he sometimes knew things without being able to explain why. The goblin was dying. That was also just obvious, the way the sky being blue was obvious. There was something dark and spreading through the grass beneath it, and its right hand was pressed to its chest in the way people held things they were afraid of losing. Harry should have run inside. He knew that. He should have gotten Uncle Vernon, or screamed, or done literally anything other than cross the garden on his hands and knees and crouched down next to the dying creature. But Harry had spent his entire life being told to stay out of the way, be quiet, don't cause trouble, and somewhere in the marrow of him there was a thing that pushed back against that, a quiet, stubborn thing that had kept him alive through 7 years of Dursleys and showed no signs of listening to sense now. "Hey," he said. Can you hear me?" The amber eyes moved to him. Focused with visible effort. "Potter." The voice was gravel and old iron. "Harry, Potter." Harry's stomach did something he didn't have a word for. "Yeah. That's me. Brackfong." Each word seemed to cost something. "My name. Remember it. Okay. Brackfong. What happened to you?" "Debt magic." A cough that sounded like it hurt. "The accounts. There is a debt. Your family's. Unpaid. I was called." He paused, gathering something. Did not expect to find this. His free hand moved, and Harry felt something brush his chest from the inside. Not from outside. From within, like something pressing against his ribs from the wrong direction. He flinched and went very still. Brackfang's eyes sharpened. Whatever he was seeing, it wasn't good. The amber had gone the color of storm clouds. "Shackles," the goblin said. Quietly. Like a man who'd just found something he hadn't expected and wished he hadn't. 15. 15, on a child. He said something in a language Harry didn't know, harsh syllables that nevertheless sounded like cursing. "Monster. You absolute monster." "What shackles?" Harry asked. "What are you talking about?" "Your magic." Brackfang's hand found Harry's wrist with surprising precision for a dying creature. His grip was cold and very strong. "It is chained. Someone has chained what you are. Each shackle, each one takes something from you. Strength. Memory. Self." He paused. You should feel it now. That you are not, all there. And the horrible thing was that Harry did feel it. He'd felt it his entire life and had no word for it. The sense of looking at himself from slightly too far away. The sense of something being blocked, the way a river runs differently when there's a dam somewhere upstream you can't see. He'd thought that was just what being alive felt like. I thought that was normal," Harry said. "No." Brackfang's grip tightened. "No. Nothing about this is normal." His eyes closed for a moment, then opened again with great effort. "I cannot complete the ritual. I am too far gone. But I can send the call. Gringotts will come. They must come. There is a debt." He broke off coughing again, and this time the coughing didn't stop for a long time. When it did, he looked at Harry with absolute clarity. "They will tell you it was necessary. They will have reasons. They always have reasons." His thumb pressed into Harry's wrist, and Harry felt something, a mark, warm as a brand but silent, settling into his skin. "The debt is recorded. Now there is a second debt. Gringotts owes you the truth. They cannot refuse." A pause. "Do not be afraid of what you are. When the shackles come off, do not let anyone put them back." "I won't," Harry said. He had no idea if that was a promise he could keep. He made it anyway. Brackfang exhaled. It was a long, slow sound like the last breath of a fire. His hand went still on Harry's wrist. Harry sat in the garden for a while, not moving. The weeds needed finishing. Aunt Petunia would notice if they didn't get done. He was aware of all of that and it meant nothing at all. After a moment, he reached out and closed Brackfang's eyes. It seemed like the right thing to do. Then he sat back on his heels and looked at the house, where inside Aunt Petunia was watching television and Dudley was eating a bowl of ice cream large enough to qualify as a small lake, and he thought very clearly, something is going to change. He was right. He just didn't know how fast. The goblins came at dawn. Harry had carried Brackfang's body behind the garden shed, he wasn't sure why, it just seemed wrong to leave him in the open, and finished the weeds, and eaten the 3 bites of leftover toast that were his dinner, and lain in his cupboard under the stairs listening to the house settle around him. He didn't sleep. He rarely slept well. He lay there and thought about Shackles. 15. What did 15 feel like? What was he missing? He was still thinking about it when the wards around the house screamed. Not out loud, he was fairly sure no one else heard anything, but Harry felt it in his teeth, this sudden sharp vibration, like a glass struck too hard. Then a sound outside, soft footsteps, multiple sets, moving with the kind of precision that meant whoever was out there had done this before and knew exactly where they were going. Harry eased his cupboard open and peered into the dark hallway. Nothing. He waited. The knock at the front door was 3 sharp raps, evenly spaced, the kind of knock that expected to be answered. For a moment nothing happened. Then Harry heard Uncle Vernon's bedroom door creak, footsteps, and the particular pattern of sound that meant Vernon was coming downstairs in his dressing gown with the belt only half-tied, something he did when he thought a late delivery or a lost drunk had knocked on the wrong door. Harry heard him fumbling with the chain. Then he heard Vernon say, very quietly, what in the bloody, and a voice from outside, cold and absolutely even, said, "My name is Ragnarok, director of Gringotts Bank. You will let us in now, or I will let us in. I strongly recommend the first option." There was a pause. The chain came off the door. Harry pushed his cupboard open wider and stepped into the hallway just as 4 goblins walked into the house like they owned it, which, given what Harry was beginning to understand about financial institutions, they might have. 3 of them wore dark armor and carried short weapons at their belts, not quite swords, not quite knives, something elegantly in between. The 4th was older. Significantly older. He moved like something that had been old for a very long time and had stopped finding it inconvenient. This was Ragnarok. Harry knew it the same way he'd known Brackfong was dying. Some things were just visibly true. Ragnarok was shorter than Harry's shoulder, because Harry was 7 and small even for 7, but he somehow gave the impression of being considerably taller than everyone in the room. He wore robes the color of iron filings. His eyes were the pale gold of a wolf's, and they swept the hallway once and landed on Harry with the kind of precision that suggested they'd been looking for him specifically. "Harry Potter," he said. Not a question. "Yeah," Harry said. Uncle Vernon had gone a color that was interesting from a medical standpoint. "Now listen here, whatever this is a private residence, you can't just, Mr. Dursley." Ragnarok didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "You have been drawing a monthly stipend from the Potter family estate for the housing of this child for 6 years. You have been feeding him approximately 1/3 of the caloric intake necessary for basic health. You have been, and your wife and son have been." He let the sentence sit unfinished for a moment, and somehow the unfinished version was worse. "The accounts are very thorough. Gringotts keeps meticulous records." He turned back to Harry. "You will come with us. Bring whatever matters to you." Harry looked around the hallway. He had a moth-eaten blanket in his cupboard, a broken toy soldier he'd found in the street, and Dudley's discarded school books, which were the only books he'd ever had. None of it exactly mattered. "I'm ready," he said. "Wait." Petunia appeared at the top of the stairs, hair in rollers, face the color of old paste. You can't take him. He's our ward." Dumbledore said. "What Dumbledore said," Ragnarok replied, "is the subject of ongoing legal proceedings that will, I assure you, be resolved. And not in his favor." He held Petunia's gaze for a moment. Whatever she saw in his face made her sit down heavily on the top stair. "The child comes with us. This is not a request." Harry walked past Vernon without looking at him. Vernon made a small sound, like a man whose certainty about how the world worked has just been revised downward quite sharply. Harry pulled on his trainers, which had a hole in the left toe, and straightened up and walked to stand beside Ragnarok. "Ready," he said again. One of the armored goblins looked at Harry with an expression that was hard to read, then looked at Ragnarok, then said something in gobbledygook that Harry didn't understand but that Ragnarok answered with a single syllable. The guard's expression shifted into something that might have been respect. They walked out of 4 Privet Drive and Harry didn't look back once. There was a black carriage in the street that hadn't been there before. Pulled by 2 horses that were slightly too dark and breathed smoke in the July heat. Harry climbed in and the door shut with a sound like a vault closing, and then they were moving, and Surrey was dissolving behind the windows like something that had never been quite real to begin with. Ragnarok sat across from him. The 2 armored goblins rode with the driver. Inside the carriage it was just Ragnarok and Harry, and the kind of quiet that Harry recognized as the prelude to something important. "Brackfong died," Harry said. "Yes. We know." A pause. "He was a senior debt arbiter. 30 years of service. What drew him to your door is a debt your family carries, one of several that have gone unaddressed due to interference with the account. He was called by that debt and he answered it." Something in Ragnarok's voice was careful and precise and completely without sentimentality, but there was something else underneath it. "He sent the ritual beacon. That is how we knew what we would find. He said I have shackles. 15 of them." "Yes. Who put them there?" Ragnarok looked at him for a long moment. "That will be confirmed when we complete the diagnostic. But Brackfang's preliminary assessment, and he was not a goblin given to error, suggests the magical signature belongs to Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. Harry sat with that. He'd heard the name. Everyone in the magical world had apparently heard it, though Harry barely knew he was part of the magical world at this point. Headmaster of a school. Famous. On chocolate frog cards, according to the only one Harry had ever seen. The man who'd left him at Privet Drive. Why? Harry asked. That, said Ragnarok, is the question we intend to answer. They arrived at Gringotts just as London was turning grey with the first light, the city still half asleep and not paying attention. The white marble building looked different at this hour, larger somehow, more serious. The doors opened as Ragnarok approached without anyone touching them, and the goblins inside looked up from their ledgers and watched Harry walk in with expressions that ranged from curiosity to something more complicated. Harry had been inside Gringotts exactly never. He'd heard about it, absorbed some vague sense of it the way you absorb things you've heard fragments of. The hall was vast and golden-lit and smelled of metal and old parchment and something else, something very old, older than the building, older maybe than the city above it. Magic. Not the small hopeful kind that turned teachers' wigs blue. Something deeper. He followed Ragnarok past the main hall and through a door behind the counters that the public never saw, and down a corridor whose walls were lined with carved stone, shapes that moved slowly when you weren't looking directly at them. Down a second passage, narrower, older. Into a room. The room was circular. The floor was dark stone and the walls were covered in runes that Harry couldn't read but that seemed to watch him. In the center was a low table, not a table exactly, more like a plinth, made of something that wasn't quite stone and wasn't quite metal. Around it stood 6 goblins in robes that were the deep green of very old copper, holding implements that Harry didn't have names for. The ritual masters, Ragnarok said. They will complete what Brakfang began. Harry looked at the plinth. Then at the ritual masters. Then at Ragnarok. Is it going to hurt? He asked. Ragnarok's expression was the most honest thing Harry had seen on an adult face in his memory. Yes, he said. It will hurt considerably. Shackles of this kind are not removed comfortably. But it will be the last time in your life that someone else's choices cause you this particular pain. A pause. You have the right to refuse. The debt Brakfang recorded gives you the right to ask for this, not the obligation to accept it. What happens if I say no? You continue as you are. The shackles remain. You grow up as whoever Dumbledore designed you to be. Harry thought about the dam in the river. About looking at himself from too far away. About 42 pounds and a cupboard and weeds. Let's do it, he said. He climbed onto the plinth and lay down and the ritual masters moved into position around him, and Ragnarok stood at the head of the table and said something in gobbledygook that the other goblins echoed, and then the world lit up from the inside. It started as warmth, almost pleasant, like stepping into sunlight after a cold room. Harry lay still and felt it move through him, this warmth, probing. Searching. And then it found the first shackle. The pain was extraordinary. There was no other word for it. It was the sensation of something embedded very deeply being pulled free, like a tooth root, like a splinter buried in bone. Harry's whole body went rigid and he made a sound he wasn't proud of, and the ritual master nearest him said something quiet in gobbledygook and the pain stepped back, not gone, but manageable. Breathe, Ragnarok said. Do not fight it. It fights harder if you resist. Harry breathed. The warmth moved again, found the next shackle. 15 times. Each one different. The first felt like bone. The second felt like something being peeled. The third was the worst one. When it came free, Harry felt a piece of himself return that he hadn't known was gone, some depth of feeling and perception that clicked into place like a lost word remembered, and the feeling of getting it back was so overwhelming that he couldn't tell if the moisture on his face was from pain or something else. He decided it didn't matter. 4. 5. 6. He lost track of time. The room seemed to breathe around him, the runes on the walls moving now, clearly moving, responding to something. 7. 8. By 9 he was somewhere beyond pain, in a place that was white and very quiet, and he thought he heard something, a sound like water, like his own magic running free for the first time, and it was so much bigger than he'd expected. So much more. He hadn't known. He'd never known. 10. 11. 12. He was crying. He didn't bother to hide it because there didn't seem to be any point in hiding it from beings who were pulling his soul apart and putting it back correctly, and also because some of the crying was grief, genuine, sudden grief, for every year he'd lived at less than himself. 13. 14 came out with a sound like a bell being struck, high and clear, and the entire room shook slightly and the runelight flared and one of the ritual masters stumbled and caught herself and said something that sounded startled. What was that? Harry heard himself ask. His own voice sounded different. More present. That one was your memory, said Ragnarok, and his voice was very controlled. The 14th shackle was placed specifically over your access to your parents. Your true memories of them, the real ones, not the impressions you've retained, were sealed. Harry was very still for a moment. Will I remember them now? In time. As you heal. 15. The last one was different from all the others. It wasn't painful, exactly, it was more like a held breath releasing, a fist that had been clenched for 7 years suddenly, slowly, opening. Harry felt it go, this last chain, and what came back wasn't a thing he could name. It was just himself. The rest of himself. The part that had been locked away and starved and made small. It came back into him like warmth from a fire, and he lay on the plinth in Gringotts with 6 ritual masters standing around him and Ragnarok at his head, and he looked up at the rune-covered ceiling and breathed. He breathed for a long time. Then he sat up. The ritual masters stepped back almost in unison. They were looking at him with expressions Harry couldn't fully interpret. Not fear, goblins clearly didn't default to fear, but something alert and careful and deeply interested. Better? Ragnarok asked. Harry opened his mouth to say yes, automatically, the way he always said he was fine when he wasn't, the shackles conditioning running its old ruts, and then he stopped. And felt the difference. The old impulse was still there, the trained smallness, the habitual apology for existing, but underneath it was something else. Something that didn't have any interest in that impulse at all. Something that had been asleep for 7 years and was now very much awake. Yes, he said, and meant it completely. A lot better. Ragnarok looked at him for a long moment. Then he did something Harry hadn't seen him do yet. He inclined his head, a small, precise bow, the kind that doesn't come cheap from anyone and costs a great deal more from a goblin who has been alive for 4 centuries. Lord Potter, he said. Welcome to Gringotts. The room where they brought him afterward was smaller and warmer, less ceremonial, more functional. Someone had put food on the table. Real food, in quantities that made Harry's stomach contract with the sheer improbability of it. Bread, still warm. Cheese. Cold cuts. A bowl of fruit. A glass of something amber that turned out to be apple juice and was the best thing Harry had ever put in his mouth. He ate carefully at first, the way he'd learned to eat, making each bite count. Then Ragnarok watched him for a moment and said, "There is more. Eat as much as you like. No one is counting." And something in the way he said it, flat, matter of fact, as though this were simply obvious, broke something loose in Harry, and he ate properly for the first time in his life. While he ate, a goblin he hadn't met yet came and sat across from him. Younger than Ragnarok, though with goblins Harry was beginning to suspect, younger, covered a significant range. Sharp-faced, watchful, with the kind of assessment in his eyes that felt less like judgment and more like cataloging. "My name is Griphook," this goblin said. "I've been assigned as your account manager and advisor. You can think of me as whoever you talk to when you need something. Do I have an account? Harry asked, between bites. You have 14 accounts, a vault containing physical assets that haven't been touched in 7 years, 3 properties, a set of standing investments, and a family library that hasn't been accessed in slightly longer than that. A pause. Officially. Unofficially there are several additional assets that have been, let's say, rerouted, in a manner that will require legal correction. His tone on those last words was the tone of someone who had an extremely strong opinion about a subject and was currently being professional about it. Harry chewed. Swallowed. Someone stole from my family? That, said Griphook, is the conservative assessment. Dumbledore? Directly or through authorized access that was, Griphook paused, choosing his word with care, generously interpreted. Harry thought about this. He was 7 years old and had spent his morning having pieces of his soul pulled out and then putting away what was, by his standards, an enormous amount of food, and he was sitting in a room under London with a goblin who was telling him his inheritance had been embezzled by the most powerful wizard in Britain. What surprised him was how calm he felt about it. Not cold, he wasn't numb. He was angry, somewhere in there, a clean and purposeful anger that was very different from the hot, helpless fury he'd always felt when the Dursleys did something particularly awful. This anger knew what it wanted. It wanted things made right. It was prepared to be patient about it. What happens now? He asked. Ragnarok, who had been sitting at the far end of the table observing, leaned forward slightly. Now, he said, we talk about what Gringotts owes your family and what your family's situation requires. And then I want to explain to you what a formal declaration of war means under Goblin law. Harry set down his bread. You're declaring war on Dumbledore? We have already done so. The declaration was signed 1 hour ago. Copies have been sent to the relevant parties. He said this as though it were an administrative formality, the way you might say we've filed the paperwork. He will not receive his copy until tomorrow morning. Until then, we have a day's advantage. Harry stared at him. You declared war on Albus Dumbledore. He thought about the chocolate frog card. Greatest wizard of the age. Defeated Grindelwald. Order of Merlin, first class. He thought about 15 shackles and 42 pounds and a cupboard under the stairs. Good, he said. Griphook made a sound that, on a different face, Harry might have called a laugh. There are things you need to understand, Ragnarok continued. Goblin war is not what wizards mean by the word. We do not send armies and cast spells. We fight with records and law and information and money, which in the long run are considerably more effective. Dumbledore's power comes from 3 sources, his personal magical ability, his political standing, and the narrative he has built around himself and around you. We cannot easily attack the first. We intend to destroy the second and third completely. And what do I have to do? At present? Nothing. Grow. Heal. Learn. Ragnarok held his gaze. You will be given everything you should have been given from birth, access to your family's knowledge, proper training, proper nutrition, proper understanding of who and what you are. When the time comes to act publicly, you will be ready. You will not act from weakness or desperation. You will act from strength. A pause. That is non-negotiable. I will not send a child to fight a war that should never have been his. Harry had been told what he would do his entire life. Had been told when to eat and when to sleep and when to be invisible. Being told something now, having an adult look at him and say you will be protected and you will be prepared, landed differently than he expected. It landed somewhere very young and very tired, and he had to look at the table for a moment before he could trust his face again. Okay, he said. What do I need to know first? And Ragnarok told him. He told him about the soul shackles in detail, what each one had suppressed, how they'd interacted, how the cumulative effect had been to keep Harry's magical core locked at roughly the capacity of a squib while making his emotional responses flatter and more pliable. He told him about the blood wards at Privet Drive, which were real and did offer genuine protection from external magical threats, but which also happened to come with a side effect Dumbledore had never once mentioned. The wards were tied to Petunia's willingness to house Harry, which meant Harry's physical and emotional suffering directly strengthened them. He had been, in a very precise magical sense, fueling the wards with his own misery. Like a battery. Ragnarok said this in a level voice without embellishment, and Harry appreciated that because the embellishment was really not necessary. He told him about the Potter vaults and the financial irregularities. He told him, carefully and clearly, that the money was recoverable. He told him about the properties, the house in Godric's Hollow, which Dumbledore had left as a monument, which had seemed noble and commemorative and was in fact a violation of Potter estate property rights that had no legal basis, and a house in Scotland that Harry's grandparents had owned, which had sat empty and magically maintained for 7 years awaiting its heir. He told him about the library. The library made Harry go very still. How big? He asked. Large enough that cataloguing it took 3 goblins 4 months, Griphook said. Your family has been accumulating texts since approximately the 10th century. Several of the volumes are considered lost by the wizarding world at large. He paused. There is also a section on family magic. The Potter line carries several inherited magical abilities that were suppressed along with everything else. Most of them should be accessible to you now. What kind of abilities? That's better discovered than described, said Ragnarok. Harry nodded. He filed it. He filed everything with a precision and speed that surprised him, and then realized it shouldn't surprise him. This was what his mind did when it wasn't suppressed. This was what thinking felt like when the shackles weren't on. It was like the difference between walking through water and walking on dry land. Can I see the vault? He asked. Tomorrow, said Ragnarok. Today you rest. You have been through a significant physical and magical ordeal and your body needs time. He said this with the air of someone who had thought about arguing with himself and decided against it. There are rooms here. You will sleep safely. In Gringotts? The lower levels have quarters for extended matters of business. You are, currently, the most important matter of business this institution has. He paused again and seemed to consider his next words. You are also, informally, under goblin protection. This means something concrete, not symbolic. No one enters these quarters without my direct authorization. No one. His pale gold eyes held Harry's. You are safe here. Perhaps for the first time in your life. I want you to actually believe that rather than simply hear the words. Harry looked at Ragnarok. He looked at Griphook. He thought about the warm food and the room and the ritual masters removing 15 years of chains. He thought about Brackfang's hand on his wrist in the garden at dawn. I believe it, he said. And he did. The room they gave him was small and stone-walled and lit by steady goblin light that didn't flicker. The bed was a proper bed, with a mattress and blankets, and someone had laid out fresh clothes in his approximate size, and there was a glass of water on the table beside the bed, and none of it was conditional on anything, on his behavior or his gratitude or his willingness to be small. Harry lay down in the bed. He stretched out fully, something he couldn't do in the cupboard, and stared at the ceiling. He was 7 years old and this morning he had woken up in a cupboard and tonight he was sleeping in Gringotts under goblin protection while the director of the oldest bank in the wizarding world prepared to destroy Albus Dumbledore's career from the inside out. He thought about Brackfang. He thought about amber eyes and a voice like gravel and a grip that hadn't let go even when everything else was failing. Do not be afraid of what you are. He wasn't. That was the strangest thing. He'd expected to feel afraid, of the magic, of the goblins, of how much had changed in a single day. But what he actually felt, lying in a real bed for the first time in his memory, was a kind of quiet readiness. Like a spring that had been compressed for 7 years had finally been released and was finding its natural shape again. He thought about 15 shackles and what they'd each felt like going. He thought about the 14th one and the memories it had sealed. His parents, not just the impressions, not just the flash of green light that visited him in dreams. Real memories. Ragnarok had said in time. He thought about the river running clear, the dam gone. He fell asleep thinking about that, and for the first time in his memory he didn't dream about anything frightening at all. He dreamed about water, running fast and free over clean stones, going somewhere with absolute certainty, and in the dream it was the most natural thing in the world. Chapter 2, What the Vaults Remember. Harry woke up knowing exactly where he was. That was new. Normally the first seconds of waking were a small private confusion, the low ceiling of the cupboard, the pipes, the darkness, and then the flat resignation of remembering. Now he opened his eyes to stone walls and steady goblin light and the smell of old metal and parchment, and he knew immediately, Gringotts. Underground. Safe. He lay still for a moment and took stock of himself. The difference was the only word for it. He felt like someone had cleaned a window he'd been trying to see through his entire life. Everything was sharper, not painful, not overwhelming, just present. The stone ceiling above him had texture and depth. The light had warmth. His own body felt different, still thin, still tired from yesterday, but connected to itself in a way it hadn't been before, like all the parts of him were finally on speaking terms. He sat up, swung his legs off the bed, and his feet touched the stone floor and he felt that, the cool solidity of it, and he sat there for a moment just feeling it because he could. Then someone knocked on the door. "Come in," he said, and his voice came out clear and even, without the habitual shrinking at the edges that had always been there before. The door opened and Griphook entered carrying a tray. On the tray was breakfast, eggs, toast with actual butter, a bowl of something hot that turned out to be porridge with honey in it, more juice, and a small pot of tea. He set it on the table beside the bed and stepped back and looked at Harry with those cataloging eyes. "You look different," Griphook said. "I am different," Harry said. Griphook made that almost laugh sound again. "Yes. Eat. Ragnarok wants you in the records room by mid-morning. You'll want to be full for what he's going to show you." Harry ate. Everything. He ate with the uncomplicated focus of someone who had decided that food was something to engage with fully and not apologize for, and when the tray was empty he felt steady and clear and ready. "What's in the records room?" he asked. "Your family's full account history. The documentation Ragnarok has assembled." Griphook paused in the doorway. "Bring your questions. There will be a lot to ask about." He left. Harry dressed in the clothes they'd laid out for him, dark trousers, a green jumper that fit properly, which was a novelty, and stood in front of the small polished square of metal on the wall that served as a mirror. He barely recognized himself. Part of it was just the clothes that fit. But part of it was something in his face, in his eyes specifically. The green of them was brighter than he'd ever seen it, vivid and sharp, and there was something in his expression that hadn't been there yesterday. Not hardness. Not even anger, though the anger was there somewhere clean and purposeful. It was more like the look of someone who has decided to be awake. Who has decided to see things clearly. He looked at himself for a moment and then he went to find Ragnarok. The records room was deep in the bank, past corridors that went through several architectural transitions, from the formal grandeur of the public floors to the older, starker stone of the working levels to something that predated any building Harry had ever heard of, walls carved smooth by tools that left no marks, lit by flames that had no fuel. Griphook led him there without commentary, which Harry was beginning to understand was Griphook's version of comfortable silence. Ragnarok was already there. So were two other goblins Harry hadn't met, introduced briefly as Sharpthorn and Goldfang, senior archivists, who nodded at Harry and returned immediately to a large spread of documents on the central table as though there were not a moment to lose. The table was covered. Parchments, ledgers, sealed envelopes that had been opened and laid flat, documents with heavy wax seals in goblin green and the bright red of ministry approval, and over all of it a low organizing system of weighted stones and carved markers that clearly meant something to the archivists and looked to Harry like organized chaos. "Sit down," Ragnarok said. He was standing at the table with his hands clasped behind his back, looking at the documents with the expression of someone who has found something they were hoping not to find. "I am going to show you 6 things. Some of them are dry financial records. Some of them are considerably less dry. I will explain each one. You will ask questions when you have them. We will not rush this." Harry sat. "Okay. First." Ragnarok laid a hand on a thick ledger. "The Potter estate accounts from October 1981 to present. The primary vault, Vault 687, has been untouched in that time. However, 3 secondary accounts were placed under administrative hold shortly after your parents' deaths. The authorization for that hold carries Dumbledore's seal." He turned the ledger to face Harry. "The hold was renewed every 6 months. For 7 years." Harry looked at the pages. He couldn't read all of it, the accounting notation was its own language, but the seal was clear enough. AD in elaborate script, pressed into green wax, over and over at the bottom of every authorization page. "What does an administrative hold do?" he asked. "It prevents the account holder or their representative from accessing or reallocating the funds," Griphook said from across the table. "It is a tool designed for estates in legal dispute." There was no legal dispute. No challenge to your guardianship, no competing claim on the estate. The hold had no legitimate basis. Then why did no one stop it? "Because the man filing the hold was Albus Dumbledore," said Sharpthorn flatly, not looking up from his documents. "And no one at the ministry looked hard enough to realize there was nothing behind it. The funds during this period," Ragnarok continued, "generated interest. That interest was rerouted through a series of charitable disbursements, each entirely legitimate on its surface. Order of the Phoenix operational expenses. Several scholarships at Hogwarts. A medical fund for unspecified purposes." He paused. "The total diverted over 7 years comes to approximately 43,000 galleons." Harry did the maths imperfectly, he had no real frame of reference for galleons, and looked at Ragnarok. "Is that a lot?" "It is enough to have given you a comfortable life many times over," Ragnarok said. "It is also, from a legal standpoint, theft." Second. A folder of parchments with a different seal, heavy, formal, the ministry's own stamp alongside a signature Harry didn't recognize. Ragnarok laid this open to a specific page and put a finger on a clause midway down. "This is the guardianship document. The one that placed you with Petunia Dursley." He read the relevant section aloud. "Placement determined by mutual agreement of the Hogwarts headmaster and the Ministry's Office for Magical Child Welfare, on grounds of blood protection efficacy and the child's security." He looked up. "Do you know what is absent from this document?" Harry read what he could of it. Looked at the names. There's no one from my family. No one from the Potter side." "Correct. Your parents had a will. Both of them. James Potter's will specifically named Sirius Black as your godfather and intended guardian, with Remus Lupin as secondary. Neither was consulted. Neither was present at the guardianship determination. The document was filed less than 48 hours after your parents' deaths, before either man could have been contacted through proper legal channels." A pause that had weight in it. "Sirius Black was arrested that same day." Harry went still. He'd heard the name, Sirius Black, the murderer, the betrayer, the one who'd given his parents' location to Voldemort. He'd heard it the way he'd heard everything about his past, in fragments, from Aunt Petunia's tight-lipped mentions, from whatever overheard conversations he'd managed over the years. The name always came attached to words like traitor and Azkaban. "Did he do it?" Harry asked. "Did he betray my parents?" Ragnarok and Griphook exchanged a look. It was the kind of look that passed between people who have decided how much to say. That, said Ragnarok, is something we are still assembling the evidence for. What I can tell you now is that the trial record for Sirius Black is incomplete. Significantly incomplete in ways that strongly suggest irregularity. He held Harry's gaze. I will not tell you he is innocent until I am certain. I will tell you that the certainty of his guilt has been substantially overstated. Harry nodded. Filed it. He'd always been good at filing things, even when the shackles were on. It had been one of the few parts of his mind that had leaked through the suppressions. Now it was like filing with both hands instead of one. What's the third thing? Third was a sealed scroll, deep red, with a seal that was neither Ministry nor Gringotts but something older, heavy gold, a crest Harry didn't recognize. Ragnarok didn't touch this one. He stood back from it slightly and looked at it with an expression that Harry was beginning to read as controlled anger. This, said Ragnarok, was discovered in Dumbledore's private correspondence files, a copy of which was obtained through means I will not detail but which are entirely within Goblin legal prerogative. He paused. It is a magical contract. Executed the night of October 31, 1981. Harry leaned forward and looked at the scroll. He couldn't read the contract itself, it was in a dense formal notation that seemed to shift as he looked at it, but his eyes went to the signatures at the bottom. Two of them. One was his parents'. Both of them. James and Lily Potter, in the looping script of people who'd signed documents in a hurry and under pressure. The other signature was Dumbledore's. What kind of contract? Harry said. It is called a sacrificial binding, said Ragnarok, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop a degree. It is an extremely ancient form of magic. Predates the Ministry by several centuries. He stopped, gathered himself, and continued. The contract binds a designated individual, in this case you, to serve as a vessel for dark magical residue, specifically the remnant of a killing curse that fails to complete its work, until such time as the vessel's death fully destroys the dark magic it carries. Harry sat with that for a moment. So I was supposed to die, he said. Not a question. You were contracted to die, Ragnarok said, with precise and deliberate emphasis on the word contracted. There is a difference. Your death was not merely anticipated as a probability of war. It was planned for. Structured. A designed endpoint. He paused. Your parents signed this believing it was a last resort protection ritual. The language of the contract's description, which Dumbledore provided to them, described it as a life anchor, a term that implies the opposite of what it actually does. Harry looked at the scroll. He looked at his parents' signatures. His mother's handwriting had a particular quality to it, quick but careful, the letters well-formed even in haste. He thought about the 14th shackle and Ragnarok's voice saying your memories of them were sealed. He thought about a flash of green light and a woman's scream that had been his only connection to his mother for 7 years. He was very quiet for a while. She didn't know, he said finally. They didn't know what they were signing. No. They did not. But he did. Yes. He did. Harry looked up from the scroll. His eyes were dry and his voice was level and something in his chest had become very, very still. What happens to the contract now? It is voided, said Sharpthorn, with obvious satisfaction. The shackles were the mechanism by which the binding was maintained in you. With the shackles gone, the magic that anchored the contract to your core has no purchase. The contract is legally and magically defunct. He paused. We have filed the voidance with the International Magical Contracts Office this morning. Under international law, Dumbledore cannot re-execute a binding of this type on the same subject. So I don't have to die, Harry said. No, said Ragnarok. You do not have to die. Harry nodded. He'd already known it, in a logical way, he'd felt the last shackle come free, had understood that what it released was himself, not a death sentence. But hearing it stated flatly, legally, permanently, was something else. He gave it a moment and then put it somewhere he could come back to later, when there weren't 5 more things on the table. "What's for?" he asked. Fourth was a file of correspondence. Letters, decades of them, between Dumbledore and various parties, the Ministry, individual witches and wizards Harry didn't know, and in a particular bundle, letters to and from Hogwarts staff. Ragnarok pulled one letter from the bundle and laid it in front of Harry. It was from Dumbledore to Professor McGonagall, dated 2 days before Harry had been left on the Dursleys' doorstep. Harry read it, slowly, because the handwriting was formal and cramped. "The child must be placed with Petunia Dursley. I am aware of your reservations and I want you to understand that they are shared. I hold no illusions about the Dursley household. However, the blood protection requires a willing host within the bloodline and there is no other option. The child will not have a comfortable life there. This is, I have concluded, actually advantageous. A child raised in comfort and knowledge of his status would arrive at Hogwarts with an inflated sense of his own importance. The experiences at Privet Drive will make him humble, receptive. He must come to us needing us. That is the safest configuration." Harry read it twice. Not because he hadn't understood it the first time. He just wanted to be sure he hadn't misread anything. He must come to us needing us. That is the safest configuration. He set the letter down. "She knew," he said. "McGonagall. She knew they were sending me somewhere bad. She raised objections." Ragnarok's voice was careful. "She lost the argument and then, did not push further." He paused. "What people do with their knowledge is a complicated thing. She is not the only one who knew something was wrong and chose the comfort of trusting the man in charge of the answers." Harry thought about that. He wasn't ready to decide how he felt about McGonagall yet. He filed it. "Fifth," he said. Fifth was a diagram. Not parchment, a different material, smooth and white, with markings in dark ink that looked partly like a family tree and partly like a magical circuit diagram. Ragnarok explained it in the careful way of someone who has organized a complex explanation into the most accessible possible sequence. The Potter family's magical lineage had, for approximately 4 generations, carried 3 inherited abilities beyond standard magical capacity. Elemental resonance, a deep attunement to natural magical forces that manifested differently in each holder. Memory sight, the ability, under certain conditions, to access preserved memories without a pensieve. And, in Harry's case specifically and for the first time in the documented lineage, something the diagram notated in a different ink entirely. "What's that one?" Harry asked, pointing. "We don't know," said Griphook, and his tone suggested this was unusual enough to be significant. "The diagnostic during the ritual showed an ability type we haven't categorized. It is not on record in any goblin documentation of wizarding lineages." A pause. "It is, however, quite large." Harry looked at the diagram. At the ink marking his unknown ability, which was indeed drawn larger than the others, taking up more space on the diagram, running deeper. "Is that bad?" "Unknown abilities are neither good nor bad," said Ragnarok. "They are interesting. We will learn what it is as your core continues to stabilize." He met Harry's eyes. "I want to be clear, I am not telling you this to make you feel exceptional. I am telling you because it is documented fact and you have the right to know what is in the records about yourself. What you do with ability is a matter of character. Character is built. It is not inherited." Harry nodded. "What's 6? Sixth was a single sheet of paper. Not parchment, actual paper, Muggle-made, with typed text. It was a letter, formal in its opening, addressed to the Office of Magical Child Welfare and signed by Dumbledore. It was dated 3 years ago, when Harry was 4. It had been written in response to a welfare check request. Apparently a social worker, a Muggle one, had flagged the Dursley household in response to a teacher's concern about Harry's weight and demeanor. Dumbledore had written to the office asking them to intervene and block the welfare check. To have the Muggle Social Services record closed. He cited magical security concerns and the necessity of maintaining the child's cover as a non-magical individual in a Muggle household. He gave no details. He offered no alternative welfare provision. He signed off with his full title and seal. The welfare check had been closed. The teacher's report had been filed away. Harry had continued to weigh 42 pounds at age 7. Harry looked at this last document for a long time. Then he looked up at Ragnarok. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "For the war. For what comes next. What do I actually need to do?" Ragnarok sat down across from him for the first time since they'd entered the room. He sat with the ease of someone who doesn't use furniture as a prop but as a deliberate choice, and he looked at Harry with those pale gold eyes and said, "Right now? Nothing. You need to grow. You need to train. You need to become who you are without someone else's hand on the throttle." A pause. "The war we are fighting is one of information and law and public record. We do not need you to be a weapon. We need you to be undeniable." What does that mean? It means that when the time comes for the wizarding world to have to make a choice about you, to decide whether to believe Dumbledore's version of you or their own eyes, we need them to see something that makes the choice obvious. Ragnarok's voice was precise and unhurried. Dumbledore's version of you is a symbol. A martyr in progress. A boy who exists to be used and sacrificed at the correct moment. If you are instead yourself. Fully yourself. Educated, capable, clear-eyed, powerful, then his narrative has nothing to grip. So I'm supposed to just be myself? With significant preparation, yes. The ghost of something crossed Ragnarok's face that might have been dry humor. The version of yourself that has been sitting in chains for 7 years needs time to develop. We will provide tutors, access to the library, training in both magical and non-magical disciplines. You will live here, in these quarters, for as long as you need. He paused. You will not be going back to Privet Drive. Harry had known that. He'd known it since the carriage. But hearing it confirmed made something in him ease that he hadn't realized was still braced. There's something else, Griphook said, from across the table. He'd been quiet during most of the 6th document. Now he slid a small sealed envelope across the table. This was left in the primary vault. Sealed with your mother's magic. The seal only released last night, after the ritual, when your core was clear. We believe it was designed to wait until you were yourself. Harry looked at the envelope. His name was on the front, in handwriting he'd never seen before but recognized immediately, the same hand as the contract signature. Lily's writing. His mother's. He picked it up. It wasn't heavy. He held it for a moment. Can I, he started. The room is yours for as long as you need, Ragnarok said. He stood, and the archivists began to gather their documents with efficient quiet. We will be outside. They filed out. Griphook last, pulling the door half closed. Harry was alone. He sat at the table covered in documents about his own life, the financial records and the guardianship papers and the sacrificial binding and the letter about making him needy and the welfare check that had been buried, and he held his mother's envelope in both hands. He opened it slowly. The letter inside was 2 pages, Lily Potter's handwriting filling both sides in the quick careful way of someone writing something important in not enough time. Harry, if you're reading this, the seal broke, which means you're free. Really free, in whatever way I was hoping for when I designed it. I'm going to try very hard not to cry while I write this because that won't help either of us. There are things I want to tell you and I'm going to tell them plainly because you deserve plain truth. I don't know exactly how old you are right now or what you know or what's happened to us. Your father and I are writing several contingency letters and we don't know which ones you'll read, but if you're reading this one, then it means the seal recognized something specific, that you are yourself. That no one else is sitting in your mind with you. I knew about the shackles. Dumbledore proposed them when you were 6 months old, called them protective bindings, said they would prevent dark wizards from detecting your magical signature. I agreed. Your father agreed. We were scared, Harry. The war was still happening, people were dying every week, and this man whom everyone trusted beyond all reason told us it would keep you safe, and we believed him. I started to doubt around your first birthday. The bindings didn't feel like protection. They felt like suppression. I tried to have them examined and I was redirected. Gently. But redirected. Dumbledore is very good at moving people to where he needs them without their noticing. By the time I understood what had been done, the war was in its final chapter and there was no safe way to undo it. The goblins would have helped, they offered, once I reached out to them, but there wasn't time. And then there wasn't time because of what happened on Halloween. What I need you to know, your father and I loved you beyond our ability to write it down. We were not perfect. We made wrong choices with good intentions. The night we died we were trying to protect you with everything we had, and whatever happened to Dumbledore's plan in the end, the love in that was real. You are a Potter and you are my son and you were always supposed to be extraordinary. Not because of a prophecy or a scar or any of the things other people have attached to you. Because of who you actually are, which I had approximately 15 months to watch and which was already so much. You were so much, even at 15 months old. I can't wait for you to find that out. Some things you should know about yourself: you are smarter than you think. You are kinder than circumstances warrant. You will be tempted to be hard and closed because the world has been hard and closed to you. Don't. The people worth trusting will recognize you. Let them. One more thing. In the vault, the locked secondary chest, the iron one with the dragon crest, there is a journal. Your father's. He left it for you. Read it when you're ready. I love you. Keep going. Mum. Harry sat at the table in the records room in Gringotts for a long time. He read the letter twice. Then he folded it very carefully along its original creases and put it back in the envelope and put the envelope in the inside pocket of the green jumper, which had a pocket there specifically, as though someone had known. Then he put his hands flat on the table, and breathed, and let the grief and the love and the fury all exist at the same time without trying to sort them into something manageable. He sat with all of it. The cupboard and the weeds and 42 pounds and he must come to us needing us and his mother's handwriting, quick and careful, writing to a version of him she'd hoped for. He sat with it for 5 minutes. Maybe 10. Long enough. Then he got up, walked to the door, and opened it. Ragnarok and Griphook were in the corridor. Ragnarok looked at him with those wolf gold eyes. I want to see the vault, Harry said. And then I want to start training. Ragnarok held his gaze for a moment. The training can begin tomorrow. Today, I know. Today rest. Harry paused. But the vault first. Something moved in Ragnarok's expression. Not softness exactly, something more useful than softness. Something like recognition. The vault first, he agreed. Vault 687 was not the deepest vault in Gringotts. There were levels below it that Harry was beginning to understand involved dragon security and magical defenses of a kind that made the shackle ritual look minor, but it was one of the older ones, and it had a quality that the deeper more secure vaults didn't: it felt lived in. Not literally, it had been sealed for 7 years, but the magic in the walls had been tended over a long time by people who cared about what was in it, and that left a trace. The door swung open and the lights came up automatically, steady golden goblin light illuminating a space that was large and organized in the particular way of people who were both wealthy and practical. Galleons in sorted stacks. Books in careful order, magical preservation cases for the oldest ones. Family heirlooms arranged on shelves with care. Several locked chests. Harry walked in slowly. He ran his hand along the shelves, reading spines. Touched the edge of a framed photograph, his parents, younger than he'd imagined, laughing at something outside the frame, his mother with her red hair loose, his father with his glasses slightly crooked. The photograph James was tickling Lily, who was trying to escape and failing and laughing too hard to care. He stood there looking at it for a moment. Then he found the iron chest with the dragon crest. It was roughly the size of a school bag, heavy when he tried to lift it, and it opened without a lock when his hand touched the crest, the Potter blood recognizing the Potter air. Inside was a journal, leather-bound, initialed JP on the cover. Well worn. Much used. Harry took it out and held it. "I'll read it tonight," he said, to nobody in particular, because it felt like it deserved to be said out loud. He looked around the vault. At the organized wealth and the family photographs and the preserved books and the locked chests and the whole reality of the life that had been kept from him, sealed here waiting. He thought about Dumbledore's letter. He must come to us needing us. He thought about how well that plan had failed. "Grip hook," he said. "Yes?" The goblin materialized at the vault entrance with impressive promptness. "The 43,000 galleons. When we get it back, and I'm assuming we will get it back." "We will," said Griphook, with the certainty of someone who has never had any doubt about this. "I want half of it put toward whatever resources Gringotts needs for the war effort. Legal costs, whatever you need." He paused. "And I want the other half divided between Hogwarts scholarships for students who actually need them, not whatever Dumbledore was using it for, and a fund for," he thought for a moment. "For Muggle-born magical children in bad placements. Not to put them in magical families necessarily. Just to make sure someone is checking on them." Griphook was very still. He looked at Harry with those sharp eyes, cataloging again, and what he was cataloging seemed to be something that was updating his assessment significantly. "I'll have the paperwork drawn up," he said, and his voice was a shade warmer than his usual register. Harry nodded. He took his father's journal and his mother's letter in her inside pocket and he walked out of the vault and back through the firelit corridors of Gringotts while behind him the vault door swung silently shut on everything that had been kept from him. He spent the rest of the afternoon in the quarters Gringotts had given him, reading. He started with James's journal at the beginning. His father's handwriting was messier than his mother's, looser, the letters running into each other with the energy of someone whose thoughts moved faster than his hand, and he didn't read it cover to cover. He opened it somewhere in the middle and read what he found and then moved to the end and read that, and what he found was a man who was funny and sharp and terrifyingly brave and sometimes an idiot in the particular way of people who trust too easily and love too hard. On the last page James Potter had written 3 sentences, dated October 28, 1981, 3 days before he died. "Whatever happens next, Harry is the best thing I ever did. Not because of the prophecy or the war. Just because he's Harry." 3 days before. Harry put the journal down and looked at the ceiling. He wasn't sad exactly. He was something that was adjacent to sad but also adjacent to a kind of enormous love for 2 people he'd never really known who had nevertheless left these letters and this journal because they'd thought ahead to him, thought about who he'd be when he read them, tried to reach forward through time and be there in some way. He decided he would learn everything about them. Not from Dumbledore, not from the official narrative. From the vault records and the letters and the journal and Sirius, if Sirius turned out to be who the incomplete evidence suggested. He would learn who they actually were and he would carry that knowledge accurately rather than carrying the sanitized saint and martyr version that the wizarding world had built in the absence of real information. That night, Griphook brought him dinner, proper dinner, a full meal, and stayed while Harry ate, and at some point the quiet between them shifted from the silence of strangers to the silence of people getting used to each other. "You didn't expect me to be like this," Harry said. Griphook tilted his head fractionally. "Like what?" "You expected, I don't know. Wizards. Entitled and oblivious." A pause. "The experience of dealing with young wizards who have recently discovered the extent of their magical legacy is fairly consistent," Griphook said. "The discovery tends to produce either paralysis or arrogance. Sometimes both in sequence. And I'm neither. You ask that your stolen money be used for children in bad placements, Griphook said. You are 7 years old and you have been in a bad placement for your entire life, and your first financial decision was outward-facing rather than personal. He paused. So. No. You are not what I expected. Harry thought about that. Does that make things more complicated? For the war, I mean. If Ragnarok was expecting to use me strategically, and instead Ragnarok does not find complexity inconvenient, Griphook said dryly. He is 400 years old. He finds simplicity suspicious. He stood to go. The tutors begin tomorrow. Magical theory in the morning, non-magical academics in the afternoon. Your core needs time to stabilize before practical training. Ragnarok is estimating 2 weeks before you can attempt formal spell work. A pause. Your magical core, by the way, as assessed in the ritual. The senior ritual master's notes put it in the top 3 he has encountered in 40 years of practice. He said this as a fact, not a compliment, which Harry appreciated more than he would have appreciated flattery. Get some sleep, Griphook said. Tomorrow begins. Harry lay in the dark after Griphook left and stared at the ceiling and thought about the day. The documents. The sacrificial binding. Dumbledore's letter. His mother's letter. His father's 3 last sentences. He thought about Ragnarok saying you will act from strength. He thought about 15 shackles, gone. The river running clear. He thought about what undeniable looked like. Not as an abstraction but as a concrete thing, what it would look like in 3 years when he walked into Hogwarts. What it would look like when he sat across from Dumbledore for the first time and looked at the man who had signed a contract to kill him and who had selected his misery deliberately and who had blocked the welfare check and stolen 43,000 galleons, and looked at him not with hatred but with that clean, purposeful clarity and said with everything his eyes and his bearing and the fullness of his magic, "You missed." He fell asleep with the ghost of a smile on his face. Somewhere above him, in a tall building with a crooked sign in Diagon Alley, a short list was being rewritten. The letter that Dumbledore received the following morning, delivered by a goblin courier who didn't wait for a reply, was formal and precise and cold as old stone. It informed him, in the language of ancient contract law, that the Gringotts Wizarding Bank had formally declared a debt of war against Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore for crimes against the Potter estate and the person of the heir Harry James Potter, that all Dumbledore's accounts and financial instruments held at Gringotts were being placed under immediate review, that copies of the relevant documentation had been filed with the International Magical Contracts Office and the Wisengamot's Office of Records, and that the institution of Gringotts considered this matter to be of the highest priority and would pursue it through every legal channel available. The courier, when he handed it over, was very small and wore armor that was ceremonially polished, and he looked at the great and powerful Albus Dumbledore with an expression of absolute equanimity that was considerably more unsettling than hostility would have been. Dumbledore read the letter standing in the entrance hall of Hogwarts in the early morning light. He read it once, quickly. Then he stood very still for a moment in the way of someone whose internal reality has just been significantly revised. Then he went back to his office and sat behind his desk and began to think. He thought for a long time. And whatever he concluded from that thinking, his eyes, blue and old and still, behind the half-moon glasses, were not the eyes of a man who had given up. That, more than anything, was why the war was real. Chapter 3, Godfather. The first time Harry produced visible magic without trying, he was in the middle of a lesson on goblin metallurgical history and the word unfair crossed his mind and every quill in the room stood up on its end. His tutor, a goblin named Veska who had the academic's particular mix of extreme patience with ideas and extreme impatience with distraction, looked at the quills. Then at Harry. Then she picked up her own quill and set it back down and said, "Continue," in a tone suggesting the quills had never moved and this lesson was going to proceed on schedule regardless of what the universe attempted. Harry liked Veska. She taught him like he was intelligent, which was novel, and she corrected him without apology when he was wrong, which he found he preferred to the particular kind of gentle condescension his Muggle teachers had deployed. She had been at it for 8 days now, history in the mornings, rotating through goblin studies and wizarding political structure and the basics of magical theory, with non-magical academics in the afternoon, mathematics, literature, science, Latin, because Harry's foundation there was frankly embarrassing and they were going to fix it. Harry was absorbing everything at a speed that seemed to mildly alarm Veska, though she expressed this by assigning him more reading rather than saying anything about it. In the evenings he read his father's journal. Not from the front, he kept moving through it at random, reading James Potter in pieces, getting to know him the way you get to know someone by sitting in their room while they're away rather than being introduced to them formally. James was brilliant and competitive and deeply, specifically funny in the way of people who've noticed exactly the right details about the world. He'd been an animagus, a stag, which the journal described with characteristic understatement as a significant personal achievement that definitely didn't take 4 years and 7 failures, ask Remus. He'd been wild about Harry's mother with the particular helpless intensity of someone who can't explain their own certainty. He'd been, in the war years, quietly terrified. He'd also, in an entry 18 months before his death, written 4 pages of increasingly urgent notes about Dumbledore's long game, his phrasing, and his growing suspicion that the headmaster's strategic thinking extended significantly further than the current conflict in ways James couldn't quite pin down but couldn't stop thinking about. Harry read those 4 pages 3 times. On the 9th day of his stay in Gringotts, Ragnarok summoned him. The director's office was a level above the records room, different in character from everything else Harry had seen in the bank, not ceremonial, not archival, just a working space for someone who worked. Maps on one wall, covered in annotations. Ledgers stacked with careful organization. A desk that was old enough to be a historical artifact and was being used as furniture, which seemed right. Ragnarok was behind it when Harry arrived, finishing a letter in the quick precise strokes of someone for whom written communication was a primary weapon. He signed it, sealed it with a press of his thumb, no wax, no tool, just the mark of his own hand, and looked up. "Sit down. I have news." Harry sat. "We have located Sirius Black." Harry went very still. "He's alive," Ragnarok said. "He is in Azkaban, which is where the Ministry put him, but alive. Our sources inside the prison, and yes, we have sources inside the prison, the guards receive their wages through us and wages create relationships, confirm he is in the secure block but in functional condition." A pause that carried something careful in it. "I want to be precise about what I am about to tell you and what it means." "Okay. We have been investigating the arrest record. The trial record. The evidence presented to the Wisengamot that resulted in his incarceration." Ragnarok paused again, and this pause was different, the pause of a man confirming something he'd already concluded internally and was now committing to saying out loud. "There was no trial." Harry stared at him. "There are transcripts," Ragnarok continued. "Documents that appear, at a surface reading, to represent trial proceedings. But our legal archivists have examined the original records with full inspection access Gringotts is entitled to as part of the debt of war proceedings, and what they found is that the documents are fabricated. They are very good fabrications. But fabricated." His voice was entirely level. "Sirius Black has been in Azkaban for 6 years without ever having stood trial." Something in the room seemed to settle differently. Not silence, there was always low sound in Gringotts, the bank breathing around them, but a quality of weight shifting. "He didn't do it," Harry said. It wasn't a question. His mind had gotten there 2 sentences ago. "We believe he did not. We are still assembling the full picture of what actually happened, who did betray your parents, why, how the blame was transferred to Black. That investigation is ongoing." Ragnarok held his gaze. "What I can tell you now is that Sirius Black is an innocent man who has been imprisoned for 6 years without trial and we intend to correct that." "How?" "We extract him. Then we build the legal case for full exoneration through channels the Ministry cannot easily interfere with, the International Confederation, the Gringotts Audit Committee, the Office of Magical Justice, which has its own independent mandate. He paused. The extraction is the immediate priority. Every day he remains in Azkaban is another day of Azkaban. Harry knew what Azkaban was. Veska's lessons had included a unit on wizarding penal history that had been deeply unpleasant. He knew about the Dementors. He knew what prolonged Dementor exposure did to a human mind. 6 years. When? Harry asked. 3 days. We are finalizing the logistics. Ragnarok watched him. You will not be involved in the extraction itself. You are 7 years old and, I know, Harry said. He didn't argue it. He understood the logic and he didn't have any interest in heroics for their own sake. But afterward. When he's out. I want to see him. That is the plan, yes. Something shifted in Ragnarok's expression. I want to prepare you for what you may find. 6 years of Azkaban leaves marks. He will need time. He may not be, initially, entirely present. He has also not seen you since you were 15 months old, and the connection between what he remembers and what he will see may be disorienting for both of you. I know, Harry said again. He thought about the journal, James and Sirius together in those entries, the particular energy of two people who functioned as each other's context. He thought about a letter his mother had written to Sirius a month before her death, which he'd found pressed into the journal's back pages. You are the best of us, Pads, even when you're being an absolute disaster. Especially then. He thought about what it would be to lose that, and then lose everything else, and spend 6 years in the dark. I'll be ready, he said. The extraction happened at 2 in the morning on a Wednesday. Harry wasn't there, but Griphook was, and Griphook's account afterward was precise and entirely without embellishment, which somehow made it worse. For goblin specialists, a specialist in counter-dementor magic, and one very specific legal document, filed that afternoon with the International Confederation's Emergency Detention Review Board, citing procedural violations so fundamental that the detention was technically rendered invalid on the spot, had walked into Azkaban and walked out with Sirius Black in under 40 minutes. The Ministry had been notified simultaneously. The notification had been worded in the way of things that are technically an opportunity to object but are structured so that objecting will be more expensive than the alternative. No one had formally objected. Dumbledore had not been notified at all. Harry was asleep when it happened, or trying to be. He lay in the dark and listened to Gringotts breathe and thought about the Dementors until Griphook knocked on his door at 5 in the morning. He's here, Griphook said. He's being looked after. Healers. It went well. A pause. You can see him tomorrow. He needs, tomorrow, Harry agreed. He went back to his bed. He didn't sleep again. The next morning, Ragnarok brought Harry to a different part of the lower levels, a section that felt more like somewhere you'd actually live than anywhere else in the bank, warmer, with rugs on the stone floors and proper lamplight. The room they stopped outside had its door slightly ajar, and through it Harry could hear the low sound of someone talking, a healer's voice being quiet and informational. Ragnarok put a hand on Harry's arm. Not stopping him. Just pausing him. He knows you're here. I told him this morning. A pause. He asked, and I am telling you this because you should know, he asked if you were all right. Before he asked about anything else. Before the trial, before Dumbledore, before his own situation. He asked about you first. Harry nodded. His throat did something he managed. Ragnarok pushed the door open. Sirius Black was sitting on the edge of a bed, wrapped in a blanket that had been pulled around his shoulders, and Harry's first thought was that he looked like a person who had recently returned from a very long way away. He was too thin, thinner than Harry, even, which seemed wrong, and the bones of his face were sharp under skin that had the quality of something long deprived of sun. His hair was long and dark and tangled. His eyes, when they found Harry across the room, were grey and very alive. That was the thing. Under all of it, the Azkaban hollowness, the physical diminishment, the way his hands shook slightly when he reached to set down the cup he was holding, the eyes were alive. Sharp and dark and vivid. Harry stood in the doorway. Sirius said, "Hi, kid," and his voice came out rougher than he probably intended and a little broken at the edges, and he cleared his throat, and then he said, more quietly, "You have your mother's eyes." I'd forgotten, I'd convinced myself I was remembering it wrong. But you really do. Harry crossed the room and sat down on the chair beside the bed. He felt strange and right at the same time, the way things feel when they slot into a shape you didn't know you'd been carrying. "I know," he said. "I've been told." Sirius looked at him for a long moment. Looking at the green eyes and the scar and the black hair and whatever else he was finding. "How old are you?" 7. 7. He said it like a person calculating something painful. 7 years. He looked at Harry's too thin wrists, at the clothes that fit, at the general condition of a child who had been very recently recovered from a state of prolonged neglect, and something moved behind his eyes that was not the face of someone in control of their emotions. He got control anyway. Visibly, deliberately. "Are you okay?" "Getting better," Harry said. "And then, because it seemed important to say, the goblins got me out too. Not just you. 3 weeks ago." "I know. Ragnarok told me." A pause. "He told me about the shackles." "All of them?" "All of them." They sat with that for a moment. "I want to kill him," Sirius said, with a flat conversational directness that was more unsettling than heat would have been. "I want you to know that's where I'm starting from emotionally so that my behavior makes sense in context." "Ragnarok says we're destroying him legally," Harry said. "Is that satisfying?" "Yes, actually." Sirius looked at him. "You're very calm for 7. I've been in an interesting few weeks." Something happened in Sirius's face at that, a shift, a crack in the controlled surface, and then he laughed. It came out rough and surprised and more real than anything Harry had heard in a long time. Not a polished sound. The sound of someone who'd just remembered that they still could. "God," Sirius said, when it had passed. "You sound like James." The deadpan. He used to say the most horrifying things in the most level voice. He paused. "I used to tell him it was his most annoying quality. I take that back. Unreservedly." "Was it the second most annoying?" Harry asked. "His most annoying quality was the hair and the complete lack of self-awareness about it." Sirius reached up and touched his own tangled mess of it, then seemed to remember where he'd spent 6 years. His expression went somewhere else for a moment. Harry waited. Sirius came back. "Right. Yes. So, the goblins tell me there's a plan." "There's a plan. What do you know about it?" Harry told him. Not everything, he didn't have everything, but what Ragnarok had shared with him. The documentation. The declaration of war. The legal strategy. The void of the sacrificial binding. He laid it out in clear, organized sequence, and Sirius sat and listened with the focused stillness of someone whose mind, once it caught hold of something, didn't let go. When Harry finished, Sirius was quiet for a moment. "Your mother would be," he stopped. Started again. "You're carrying all of that very steadily." "I had a few days," Harry said, "to process." "You've had about 12 hours. He paused. "And the Dementors were not kind to you for 6 years, and I think you're allowed to process at your own speed." Sirius looked at him with an expression that had too many things in it to name. "Who raised you?" he said, and it came out half as a joke and half as genuine confusion and entirely as grief. "Nobody, technically." Harry said it flatly, not for effect but because it was accurate. "Which is probably why I'm like this." The silence after that was different from the earlier silence. It had texture. Sirius leaned back against the headboard and looked at the ceiling for a while, and Harry sat in the chair and looked at the wall, and outside in the corridor the bank made its low sounds, and somewhere deep under London the vaults breathed. "James's last entry in the journal," Harry said. "Did you know about it?" "Which one?" "The one where he says I'm the best thing he ever did. Not because of the prophecy. Just because I'm me." Sirius went very still. Then he put one hand over his face and said nothing for a moment, and Harry looked at the wall and gave him the time. "Yeah," Sirius said finally, voice muffled by his own hand. "Yeah. He said that to me too. The week before." He stopped. James didn't say things like that lightly. He was James, he was always joking, always on, and then sometimes he'd just say the exact true thing. No warning. "I have 14 months of memories coming back slowly," Harry said. "They started at night, about a week after the ritual. I keep getting pieces." He paused. "I remember his hands. Your hands are similar." Sirius took his hand away from his face and looked at his hands. They were shaking slightly less than they had when Harry came in. "Yeah. All the blacks have long fingers. James used to say," he stopped, smiled, "something small and private and not quite sad. James used to say I should have been a pianist. I told him I was a pianist, I just played people instead of instruments. Was that true? I was 17 and very pleased with myself. Take it with appropriate salt." Harry thought about that for a moment. About 17 and pleased with yourself before everything fell apart. He decided that whoever 17-year-old Sirius had been, 6 years of Azkaban Sirius was building himself back up from somewhere deep and doing it with more humor than Harry might have managed, and that counted for something significant. Over the following days, they found a rhythm. Not a father-son rhythm, too soon for that, both of them too new to each other, but something adjacent to it. Sirius was there when Harry finished lessons in the late afternoon. Sometimes talking, sometimes just present in the same room. He was a reader, had been before. Gringotts' library was available to him, and he went through books with the hungry speed of someone who'd spent 6 years in the dark. He asked about Harry's lessons with genuine curiosity, not parental prompting. He asked about the shackles. Not in a way that pushed, but in the way of someone who needed to understand the shape of the thing. Harry told him, precisely and fully, and Sirius listened without interrupting, and at the end said, "When I get my magic back properly," his magic had been blunted by Azkaban, was recovering slowly, "I want to help with the training. If Ragnarok will allow it. I'll put in a word," Harry said. Sirius's mouth curved. "You already have pull with a 400-year-old goblin warlord at age 7. Your father at age 7 could barely manage charm with the school librarian. The school librarian isn't trying to help your godson overthrow the most powerful wizard in Britain." "True." A pause. "Also, you called yourself my godson." Harry looked at him sideways. "Is that not accurate?" Sirius was very quiet for a moment. "It is extremely accurate," he said. Yes. It is." On the 4th day after Sirius's arrival, Ragnarok joined them for dinner. Not a formal meeting, he appeared at the table in the small dining room that had become their shared evening space with the air of someone who had made a deliberate choice to eat with people rather than work alone. He sat. Food appeared, because Gringotts apparently had kitchens that responded to Ragnarok's proximity. "The ministry response to Black's extraction has been predictable," Ragnarok said, eating with the brisk efficiency of someone for whom meals are functional. Formal protest. Questions about jurisdictional authority. Some noise about the legality of the International Confederation filing. He paused. Nothing that will stick. The detention was procedurally invalid. Any legal challenge will require them to admit they knew that, and they will not do that. What about Dumbledore? Sirius asked. He'd been asking this question with the consistency of someone who had decided this was the most important data point in any conversation. "Quiet," said Ragnarok. "Which is more concerning than noise?" "He's thinking," Harry said. Both Ragnarok and Sirius looked at him. "He's had 3 weeks with the declaration and now Sirius is out and the legal filings are public. He's not reacting because he's not a reactor." Harry thought about those 4 pages in his father's journal. The long game. He's planning. He's deciding what the response is that costs him the least and preserves the most. A pause. "We should assume whatever he does next won't look like what he's actually doing." Ragnarok looked at Harry with those wolf-gold eyes for a moment. Then he looked at Sirius. Sirius spread his hands slightly, a gesture that said, "I know, right." "The boy is not wrong," Ragnarok said. "Dumbledore's last direct communication to us was the formal response to the declaration, procedurally correct, legally adequate, entirely meaningless. His actual moves will come through proxies." He paused. "We believe the first one came yesterday. Someone has been making inquiries about the Potter boy's current location through ministry channels." Harry ate his dinner without changing expression. "How close are they?" "Not close. We are not using magical channels for your security, which means they cannot trace magical signatures. And Gringotts has protections that the ministry cannot simply override." Ragnarok's voice was entirely steady. "You are not in danger here. But we should assume Dumbledore now knows, or suspects, that you are here." "He'll send someone he trusts," Sirius said. He'd gone slightly still. "Someone I'd recognize. Someone Harry might respond to." He paused. "McGonagall is the obvious choice." "Yes," said Ragnarok. "And what? We turn her away?" "We see what she has to say," Harry said. He thought about the letter. "He must come to us needing us." He thought about raising objections and then not pushing further. "She's not Dumbledore. She made wrong choices and she knows it. If she comes here, she knows she's coming to look at evidence she helped create, and she came anyway." He paused. "I want to meet her." Sirius looked at him carefully. "She's not going to immediately switch sides, Harry. Whatever guilt she's carrying, I know." Harry looked back at him. "I'm not expecting her to switch sides. I'm expecting her to see. There's a difference." He paused. "And if Dumbledore is using her as a proxy, then everything she sees here goes back to him. Which means we get to decide what he learns." Sirius looked at Ragnarok. Ragnarok looked at Sirius. "He is definitely not 7, Sirius said. "He is demonstrably 7, Ragnarok replied. "He is simply also this." McGonagall came on a Saturday, 11 days after Sirius's extraction. She came through the public doors of Gringotts in full professorial robes, which Harry thought showed either courage or commitment to appearances or both, and she asked to speak with the director's office. The teller who received her request sent it upstairs without comment, and Harry, who was with Ragnarok when the message arrived, watched the director read it. "Your call," Ragnarok said. "Let her in," Harry said. "The records room." He watched Ragnarok's mouth do something that wasn't quite a smile. "The records room," Ragnarok agreed. She was not what Harry had expected, and he'd spent time trying not to build expectations. She was tall and sharp-edged and wore her severity the way some people wear a coat, not as a barrier but as a kind of integrity, a commitment to precision over comfort. She walked into the records room and stopped. Harry was sitting at the table. Sirius was standing by the wall with his arms folded. Ragnarok was at the head of the table. Griphook was in the corner, taking notes before anything had been said. McGonagall's eyes went to Sirius first. Something crossed her face that was too complicated to name. Then they went to Harry. She looked at him for a long moment. Taking in the green jumper that fit, the clean, well-fed face, the eyes that were watching her back without the slightest inclination to look away. "Harry," she said, and her voice had something in it that she clearly hadn't intended to be audible. "Professor," Harry said. He'd been told she was a professor. He thought it was the right honorific for this moment. Not cold, not warm. Something in between that left room. She sat down across from him. She set her hands on the table, flat, in the manner of someone presenting themselves for inspection. "I want to explain," she said. "You can," Harry said. "But first I want you to read something." He slid the letter across the table. The one Ragnarok had given him. "He must come to us needing us. That is the safest configuration." She picked it up. Harry watched her read it. Her face was very controlled, but her jaw tightened in the second sentence and stayed tight through the rest, and when she set it down her eyes were bright in a way that she was managing with visible effort. "I knew it was wrong," she said. Quietly. "From the beginning. I told him." "I know," Harry said. "The first letter is in the file. Your objections are documented." He paused. "He overruled you and you deferred. I'm not here to punish you for that. I'm here because you're here, and I want to understand why." She looked at him. She seemed to be recalibrating something. "He doesn't know I've come." "This isn't," she stopped. Started again. "He asked me to assess the situation. Make contact. Report back." Her jaw worked slightly. "I have no intention of reporting anything." "Why not?" Sirius said from the wall. His voice was level. He'd been very controlled since she walked in. Harry could feel the effort of it. McGonagall looked at Sirius. "Because I should have said more 6 years ago." She said it directly, without softening. "When you were arrested. I should have pushed for a proper trial. I had influence I chose not to use because I trusted, because she stopped. Because I thought he knew things I didn't and his judgment was better than my doubts." She paused. "I see now that my doubts were better than his judgment." The room was quiet for a moment. Sirius said, "That's not enough." He didn't say it harshly. He said it like a fact. "No," McGonagall agreed. "It's not." Harry looked at her. He thought about the letter, the objections documented and then abandoned. He thought about looking away as the easier choice. He thought about a welfare check getting closed. He thought about all the different shapes that complicity took when you dressed it in enough good intentions and enough trust in someone else's certainty. He also thought about what Ragnarok had said, what people do with their knowledge is a complicated thing. He thought about what his mother had written, "The people worth trusting will recognize you. Let them." "There is a file," he said, "that I'm going to ask Griphook to put in front of you. It contains the full documentation we have assembled." He paused. "All of it. The shackles. The sacrificial binding. The financial records. The trial, or lack of one." He watched her. "I want you to read it because you are someone who works with children, and someone Dumbledore will tell his version to first, and I think you deserve to have the real version before that happens so that when he tells it to you, you'll know exactly what he's leaving out." McGonagall looked at him for a long moment. "How old are you?" she said, in the voice of someone who has asked this as a genuine question, not a rhetorical one. 7, Harry said. "Right," she said. And then, "All right. I'll read it." She read for 3 hours. Harry and Sirius left her to it for the first hour and a half and came back to find her in the same position with a slightly different expression, something that had moved from controlled to stripped, something that was honest and not comfortable. She finished. She set the last page down. She looked at the sacrificial binding for a moment with the look of someone processing something that has updated their understanding of a person they thought they knew. "He convinced your parents it was protective," she said. "Yes. They signed it believing, yes." She was quiet. Then, what do you need from me? Nothing yet, Harry said. When the time comes, there will be things you can do that we can't, because you're inside the institution and we're not. He paused. But first, I need to know that you're here because you've decided to be here. Not because I've shown you documents and now you feel obligated. Not because Dumbledore will be upset and guilt is a sufficient motivator. He held her gaze steadily. I need you here for the right reasons or not at all. Because if you're here for the wrong reasons, you're a liability, and I'd rather you went back and said nothing than tried to help us from ambivalence. McGonagall stared at him. Something shifted in her face, a move from surprise to something that had more weight in it. Where did you learn to think like this? She said. 7 years of watching people with power use it badly, Harry said simply. You learn what to look for. She nodded slowly. She gathered the documents, paused, looked at Harry. May I take copies? No, said Ragnarok from the doorway, where he had apparently reappeared without anyone noticing. The originals remain here. If you want to remember the contents, you do so with your own mind. Which I understand is excellent. He looked at McGonagall with the particular regard of someone assessing a tool they're not sure yet whether to trust. You will, however, receive a summary document, the same one we intend to distribute publicly at the correct moment. He paused. If you wish to be present when that happens, that is a conversation for another day. McGonagall stood. She straightened her robes with the precise automatic gesture of someone for whom composure is a practice rather than a state. She looked at Sirius. I am sorry, Sirius, she said. Simply. Without explanation or caveat. Sirius looked at her for a long moment. I know you are, he said, finally. I know. He paused. Come back when you've decided. She left. The door closed quietly behind her. In the silence that followed, Sirius rubbed his face with both hands. Right, he said. That was, I need a minute. Take it, Harry said. He turned to Griphook. She'll come back. You think so? Griphook asked. She read every page, Harry said. She didn't stop once. She didn't ask us to tell her what to think about it. He paused. Someone who was going to go back to Dumbledore would have read the parts that confirmed their worst fears and stopped there. She kept going because she wanted to understand it fully. People who want to understand things fully are people who are going to do something with that understanding. He paused. She'll come back. Griphook wrote something in his notebook with the air of someone adding a data point. That night, Harry sat in his room with his father's journal open to the middle section and thought about the day. About McGonagall's face reading the sacrificial binding. About Sirius's voice saying that's not enough without heat, as a fact. About the way a room full of difficult truths could become, with the right people in it, the beginning of something. He thought about Dumbledore sitting somewhere in Hogwarts, thinking his long thoughts, making his careful plans. He thought about a man who had looked at a 7-year-old and thought the most useful configuration was needy. Who had looked at an infant and put 15 chains on his soul and called it protection. The anger was there, clean and purposeful, the same as it had been on day one. But tonight it had company. Tonight it was sitting alongside something more structural, not hope exactly, more like infrastructure. The sense of things being built. McGonagall. Sirius. Ragnarok and Griphook and Vesca and the tutors. The documents in the records room. The letter in the vault. Keep going, his mother had written. Harry Potter, 7 years old, sitting under London in the oldest bank in the wizarding world, thought, yes. Exactly that. He closed the journal and went to sleep, and in the morning training began in earnest, and nothing about the next 3 years was going to be easy or slow or safe. Good. Chapter 4, The Neville Problem. 3 years passed the way rivers pass, not slowly, not quickly, but with the absolute certainty of something that knows exactly where it's going. Harry turned 8 in the Gringotts quarters and Sirius made him a cake using a cookbook borrowed from the goblin kitchens and a complete lack of formal baking experience, and the result was structurally questionable and tasted extraordinary, and they ate it at the table in the small dining room while Griphook made pointed comments about human culinary improvisation and Ragnarok ate 2 slices without acknowledging that this was unusual behavior for a 400-year-old goblin warlord. Harry turned 9 in the Scotland house. The house was in the Highlands, 3 miles from the nearest village, on a hillside that caught the morning light in a way that made the stone walls go gold before the rest of the world woke up. It had been maintained by goblin caretaker Magic for 11 years and was, as a result, exactly as his grandparents had left it, slightly cluttered, deeply comfortable, with a library on the ground floor and a kitchen that was larger than necessary and a garden that had grown wild in the maintained way of magical gardens that know what they're doing without direction. Harry loved it immediately and completely. Sirius had his legal status restored in November of Harry's 8th year, a proceeding before the Wisengamot's audit committee that Ragnarok had described afterward as satisfying in the tone of a man who had just watched a superior chess move land. The case had been airtight. The fabricated trial documents, once held under independent scrutiny, had dissolved under examination the way all fabrications eventually do when the right people are doing the looking. The vote had been 13-4 for full exoneration, a formal apology from the ministry, and the reinstatement of the Black family assets that had been frozen upon his imprisonment. Dumbledore had not attended the hearing. He'd sent a formal letter of support for the exoneration that was precisely as inadequate as it needed to be, supportive enough to avoid looking obstructive, tepid enough to signal that he was not pleased. Ragnarok had read it with the expression of someone receiving exactly the information they expected to receive. Sirius, walking out of the Wisengamot building into grey November London, had stood on the pavement and breathed for a moment. Harry had stood beside him. After a moment Sirius had said, "Right," and then said nothing else for a while, and Harry had been quiet with him, and that had been enough. By the time they moved to the Scotland house, a shape had developed between them that was not yet father and son but was something honest and solid, something built from 3 years of lessons and shared meals and Sirius gradually teaching Harry the things James had known that weren't in any textbook, the Marauder's map lore, the theory of animagus transformation, the particular kind of lateral thinking that had made James and Sirius brilliant students and slightly insufferable as opponents. Harry taught Sirius what Vesca had taught him about goblin history and political structure, because Sirius knew almost nothing about it and it was useful, and also because watching a 31-year-old former prisoner discover that he'd been operating with a profoundly incomplete picture of magical society was genuinely interesting. The magic came fast. Faster than the tutors had expected, faster than anyone had said out loud, though Ragnarok had not looked surprised. The elemental resonance showed itself first, not dramatically, not with fire and earthquakes, but in the way that magic settled when Harry was working it, a sense of rightness, of the magic finding the most efficient path the way water finds the lowest ground. Spells he was taught once and then refined without instruction. Complex workings that his tutors would set him as 2-week projects and that he'd come back with in 4 days, not because he'd rushed but because he'd seen straight to the underlying structure and there was simply less work to do once you understood the thing properly. The memory site came online in the Scotland house, which made sense. The house itself was full of old impressions, his grandparents' lives layered into the walls and floors, and one morning Harry touched a doorframe and got a full 5-second impression of a woman he'd never met who had his father's cheekbones, laughing at something in the garden. He stood there for a moment afterward with his hand still on the wood, and then he went to find Sirius and said, "I think I just met my grandmother," and Sirius sat down quite suddenly. The third ability, the unclassified one, the one that Griphook had noted as large in that first diagnostic, showed itself last, and quietly, and Harry almost missed it. He was 10, practicing in the garden behind the Scotland house on a grey October afternoon, working through a defensive sequence that Sirius had designed and that was more complicated than anything Vesca had set him in the formal curriculum. He was cycling through it, not thinking consciously, letting the magic flow through the sequences the way you let your hands play through a piece of music you know well. And then something, underneath the sequence, underneath the conscious working, stirred. It felt like depth. It felt like looking into water that you'd thought was 3 feet deep and discovering it was 30. It felt like the elemental resonance but larger, and older, and connected to something he didn't have a name for yet. The grass in the garden flattened slightly in a ring around him. The gray sky above pulled, briefly, for just a second, toward an unusual shade of violet. Then it was gone. Harry stood in the garden and looked at the flattened grass and thought, so that's there. He mentioned it to Griphook, who noted it with the expression of someone whose long-running suspicion has been confirmed. He mentioned it to Ragnarok, who said, yes. We've been waiting for it to announce itself, in a tone that suggested this was an entirely appropriate development and not particularly surprising. What is it? Harry asked. Come back to me when you've had more contact with it, Ragnarok said. Understanding it through description before you understand it through experience will only make the description inaccurate. Harry found this response characteristic and not entirely satisfying and went back to the garden and practiced. He was 10 years and 2 months old when the healer's appointment happened. The appointment was routine. Ragnarok had instituted regular magical core assessments as a matter of protocol, tracking the stabilization of Harry's core post-ritual with the thoroughness of a man who believed in documentation. The healer was a goblin contracted specialist, a wizard named Tiberius Crane who came to the Scotland house, ran the assessments, wrote his report, and left with the minimal fuss of a professional. Harry didn't particularly mind them anymore. The first few had been slightly strange. Lying still while someone mapped the shape of your own magic was an intimate process, but Crane was clinical and quick and didn't make conversation beyond what the assessment required. The appointment in early December was at the Healer's Hall in Diagon Alley rather than the Scotland House, because Crane had equipment there that wasn't portable and one component of the assessment required it. Harry and Sirius went down by flu. The Scotland House had a secure connection maintained by Gringotts, and arrived in the private reception area of the practice without incident. There was a boy in the waiting room. He was Harry's approximate age, round-faced, with brown hair and the expression of someone who had recently been told something frightening and was being very brave about it in a way that was slightly heartbreaking. He was there with an elderly woman in a pointed hat who sat with her back very straight and her handbag on her knees and the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who are determined not to show that they're worried. Harry sat down. Sirius settled into the chair beside him with the low-grade alert quality he'd developed since Azkaban, never quite relaxed in public spaces, always slightly positioned. Not anxious. Just aware. The boy looked across the room at Harry with the careful horizontal assessment of children who aren't sure yet whether a new person is going to be a problem. Harry looked back. "Hi," he said. "Hi," said the boy. A pause. "Your hair's really messy." "I know," Harry said. "My gran says I should always brush mine before appointments." He glanced at the elderly woman, who was pretending not to listen with considerable concentration. "But sometimes I forget." "Sometimes I do too," Harry said. He had, in fact, brushed his hair this morning, but this did not seem like a hill worth dying on. "I'm Harry." "Neville," said the boy. "Longbottom." "My gran's over there." The elderly woman, Neville's gran, had stopped pretending not to listen. She was looking at Harry with the sharp, assessing look of someone who has just placed a face. Her eyes went briefly to his scar, then, with visible deliberation, away. "Augusta Longbottom," Sirius said pleasantly, from beside Harry, with the tone of someone who has known the name for some time and has prepared for this exact scenario. He smiled at her. "Sirius Black. Good to meet you." Augusta Longbottom's expression was a complicated document. The boys went back to their quiet conversation. "Neville was here for a diagnostic," he explained. "His magic had been a bit unreliable recently," which was the kind of phrasing that suggested someone else had chosen those words for him. He'd had a flying incident at home. A vase that had been his grandmother's had somehow ended up on the roof, and the diagnostic was to see what was happening. Harry listened. He heard flying incident and unreliable and see what was happening and felt something very specific, a recognition, the way you recognize a room you've been in before even with all the furniture rearranged. Does it feel like it's unreliable? He asked carefully. Or does it feel like it's trying to do something and something's stopping it? Neville blinked. He thought about this with the focus of someone who hasn't had the question put quite that way before. The second one, he said slowly. It's like when you're trying to say something and you can't find the word. Like it's there, but I can't quite reach it. Harry nodded. He didn't say anything else. He filed it. After the appointments, Harry's first, then Neville's, Harry found Sirius in the reception area and said, very quietly, his magic is suppressed. Sirius looked at him. You're sure? Not medically. But yes. He paused. It feels like what I felt before the ritual. The same kind of blocked. He paused again. Did the assessment say anything? Sirius had spoken briefly to Crane while Harry was changing back into his outdoor robes. Nothing conclusive. Crane is running additional scans. A pause. He did say, informally, that the magical signature had an unusual quality. A layering that wasn't developmental. Harry looked across the room at Neville, who was sitting with his grandmother, listening to her explain something in a low voice with the patient attention of a child who has been listening to adults explain things his whole life. He thought about what suppression looked like from the outside. He thought about 42 pounds and a cupboard. He thought about Neville's face when he said like it's there but I can't reach it. I need to talk to Ragnarok, Harry said. The investigation took 2 weeks. Ragnarok had to be careful. Augusta Longbottom was not a Dursley, she was not negligent or cruel, she was a woman of standing in the wizarding world and any approach that looked like an accusation without evidence would be worse than no approach at all. The Goblin archivists went through the Longbottom family records with the same thoroughness they'd brought to the Potter files. What they found was different in almost every particular from the Potter situation, and similar in the most important one. Neville Longbottom had 2 suppression charms on his magical core. Not Shackles, these were different in structure and origin, older in design. They'd been placed when he was 18 months old by a well-regarded magical pediatric healer, on the explicit instruction of his grandmother. The healer's notes, still on record, documented the reason, family concern regarding the child's core stability following the emotional trauma to both parents. Standard practice, prophylactic dampening to prevent uncontrolled manifestation during grief-proximate developmental period. Augusta Longbottom had placed suppression charms on her grandson to protect him from his own magic in the wake of his parents' torture. She had intended them to be temporary. She had, at some point, forgotten they were there, or told herself he'd been assessed and found to need them, or convinced herself over time that Neville's quiet and his struggles were simply who he was rather than what had been done to him. There was no malice in it. There was no Dumbledore in it. There was grief and fear and a grandmother trying to hold together the only family she had left after the worst night of her life. And Neville Longbottom, at 10 years old, had spent his entire life reaching for something he could almost touch and never quite hold. You have to tell her, Harry said. Yes, said Ragnarok. She'll push back. Yes. Will she listen? Ragnarok looked at him. That depends considerably on how it is said, and who says it. A pause. I believe Augusta Longbottom is a woman who can be reached with the right combination of evidence and honesty. I also believe she will hear it better from you than from me. Harry thought about that. Why me? Because you are 10 years old and she will look at you and understand, in a way that my documentation cannot fully convey, what a suppressed child looks like when they are not suppressed anymore. Ragnarok paused. You are the argument, Harry. Not the words. The argument is what she sees when she looks at you. Harry considered this. All right, he said. The meeting was at the Longbottom family townhouse in Wizarding London, a formal address that said something about Augusta's priorities, neutral ground that was also, subtly, her ground. She received them with the manner of someone who has decided to be gracious and reserved the right to change their mind. Harry brought Sirius. He brought Griphook with the documentation. He did not bring Ragnarok, because this wasn't a goblin declaration of war, it was a conversation between people. They sat in a formal drawing room with good furniture and old portraits and a general atmosphere of significant expectations being maintained over generations. Augusta Longbottom sat very straight and looked at Harry across the tea table and clearly wasn't sure what she was looking at. Neville was upstairs. Augusta had made sure of that. Harry had not argued it. Not yet. "Mr. Potter," she said. "I understand you have information regarding my grandson's magical assessment." "Yes," Harry said. He didn't add anything to it. He let the word sit. She waited. "He has suppression charms on his core," Harry said. "2 of them. They were placed when he was 18 months old and they've never been removed." He paused. "Griphook has the documentation from the healer's records. We can go through that. But first I wanted to ask you something." Augusta's expression had tightened. Not into anger, into the posture of someone bracing for something. "What?" "When Neville struggles at things, magic, confidence, any of it, what do you tell yourself that is?" Silence. "Because the people who put restrictions on me," Harry said, "they had an explanation for what I was. A reason my being limited was appropriate, or necessary, or just how things were." He held her gaze, and his voice wasn't accusing, it was careful and clear. "And the people who loved me believed it because it was easier than the alternative, and because the person saying it was very certain." He paused. "What is the explanation you've been using for Neville?" Augusta Longbottom looked at Harry Potter for a long moment. Something moved behind her eyes, something complicated, layered, the kind of thing that takes a long time to build and a moment to crack. "He takes after his father," she said. Her voice was very controlled. "Frank was, he developed slowly magically. Late bloomer. Neville is simply, Augusta." Harry said her name directly, without title, and she blinked at the shift. Frank Longbottom was assessed at 10 as one of the most powerful aurors in the training cohort. His file is in the ministry records and Griphook pulled it. He was not a late bloomer. A pause. "Neville is not a late bloomer. Neville is restrained. There's a difference and you know it, and I think you've been not looking at it for a very long time." The room was very quiet. Sirius, to his significant credit, said nothing. Griphook, in the corner, made a small note. Augusta Longbottom's hands, on the arms of her chair, were very still. Too still. The stillness of someone holding themselves together through sheer structural determination. "He is all I have left," she said. Her voice didn't change. It was still controlled, still formal. But the words came out raw underneath the formality, the truth of them too large for the careful register she'd built around it. "His parents they are alive and they are not there, and every day I look at him and I see Frank at his age and I cannot," she stopped. "When he was small and the magic was unstable and we didn't know what it would do, I was afraid. I was afraid of losing him too." "I know," Harry said. Quietly, without judgment. "I know you were. I should have had the charms reviewed. Each word carefully placed. I meant to. Several times she stopped again. "Yes," Harry said. "Not unkindly. But here's where we are now." He leaned forward slightly. "Griphook has the name of the ritual specialist who removed mine. She's the best in Europe and she's already agreed to see Neville if you ask. The procedure it's not comfortable, but it's manageable, and Neville is strong enough." He paused. "I know he is because I've met him and his magic is strong and angry at being held, and that means it's intact. It's been waiting." Augusta looked at the documentation that Griphook had laid on the table. She didn't pick it up immediately. She looked at Harry. "You were at 4 Privet Drive," she said. I heard. When you were taken out. Her voice had a different quality now, careful and honest. I heard what was done to you. What was found. A pause. And you're sitting here telling me this as though you bear no particular, as though you are not angry? Harry said. I am angry. But not at you. He paused. The thing that was done to me was deliberate. Designed. What you did to Neville was love going wrong. He met her eyes. Those are very different things and I know the difference. Augusta Longbottom picked up the documentation. She read it. Harry and Sirius and Griphook waited, and the fire in the grate burned steadily, and the portraits in their frames were, for the first time Harry had noticed, completely silent. She read for 20 minutes. At the end she set the papers down and looked at nothing for a moment and then said, I'll call him down. Neville came downstairs with the wariness of a child who knows something significant is happening and has been kept out of it. He came into the drawing room and looked at his grandmother and then at Harry, and his brow creased. You're at the healers, he said. From before. Yeah, Harry said. Sit down. We need to talk to you about something. Neville sat. He looked between Harry and his grandmother. Augusta had composed herself with remarkable speed. She still held all the structural tension of the last half hour, but she had organized it into something that looked, superficially, like calm. There's something that was done to your magic when you were very small, Harry said. He said it directly and without preamble, because Neville was 10 years old and deserved the truth in plain language. A kind of charm that puts a limit on it. Your grandmother had it done to protect you and she's going to have it undone now. He paused. I had something similar. Not the same but similar. When it came off, everything changed. Neville was very still. His eyes were intent. Changed how? Like, Harry thought about how to describe it accurately. Like the volume going up. On everything. Magic, thinking, feeling. Like you were at a 10% and you go to 100. He paused. It's a lot at first. But it's yours. It's what was always supposed to be there. Neville looked at his grandmother. Augusta Longbottom met her grandson's gaze with an expression that was, for the first time since Harry had met her, entirely undefended. I am sorry, she said. She said it the way Sirius had once said it to McGonagall, simply, without armoring it in qualifications. I am sorry, Neville. Neville looked at her for a long moment. He was 10 years old and his grandmother had never once, Harry suspected, said those words to him, not because she was a cruel woman but because she was a proud one who had built her certainty like a wall and lived behind it. Neville absorbed it. He took it in and didn't immediately know what to do with it, which was the correct response. Okay, he said finally. Not dismissing it. Just, okay. I heard it. I'm going to think about it. So we fix it? We fix it, Harry said. The ritual to remove Neville's 2 suppressions was significantly less dramatic than Harry's had been, 2 charms rather than 15 shackles, and a child whose core had not been systematically starved but merely capped, but it was, by any account, dramatic enough. The specialist who'd handled Harry's ritual, the goblin Brelka, who operated under Ragnarok's recommendation, worked in a room at Gringotts 3 days later. Augusta was present. Harry waited outside with Sirius. From inside the ritual room came, at one point, a sound like a very large door being thrown open. Then silence. Then Neville's voice saying something that was bleeped out by the stone walls but had the unmistakable cadence of a word his grandmother would not approve of, followed immediately by Augusta's voice saying, Neville Longbottom, we will be discussing that later. Harry looked at Sirius. Sirius was grinning with a specific quality, the grin of someone hearing a sound they've been waiting for without knowing they were waiting for it. He's fine, he said. Neville came out 20 minutes later. He looked different in the way Harry recognized from the inside, wider awake, more present, as though someone had brought the resolution of him into focus. He stood in the corridor and opened his hands and looked at them and then looked up at Harry. "Is this what it's supposed to feel like?" he said. His voice had more resonance in it than before. "Yes," Harry said. "Exactly this." Neville closed his hands. Opened them again. "It's loud," he said. He looked mildly alarmed and also like this was the best thing that had ever happened to him simultaneously. "It gets quieter," Harry said. "And then you miss the loudness when it does, so you push further." He paused. "You'll get used to it. And then you'll want more." Neville looked at him with those newly sharpened eyes and said, "Can you teach me? The things you know?" Harry didn't hesitate. Yes. He'd been thinking about it since the waiting room. About what it meant to have been where he was and to watch someone else be where he'd been. About what his mother had written, "The people worth trusting will recognize you." He looked at Neville Longbottom, 10 years old, 2 suppressions removed, standing in a Gringotts corridor with his hands open and magic finally running through them the way it was supposed to, and he thought, yes. This person recognizes me. They started 3 days later. Harry had use of a practice room in the Scotland House, a large, high-ceilinged space in the back wing that had, at some point, been a ballroom and that his grandparents had repurposed for practical magical work, the walls layered with impact dampening and containment charms. Sirius had added his own refinements over 3 years. It was, by the standards of private magical training spaces, excellent. Neville arrived by Portkey the first morning with a bag of school supplies, the slightly wary look of a newcomer, and a determination that he was holding in both hands. Augusta had agreed to the arrangement with the particular manner of someone making a significant decision and having made it, fully committing. She'd also agreed, after 2 further conversations with Harry, to speak privately with Ragnarok about the Longbottom family situation and what support she might be able to provide in the broader context. Harry wasn't sure about that last one yet. He'd wait and see what she decided. He'd learned from the McGonagall situation that the right approach to people in complicated positions was to be honest and then give them space to decide. You couldn't push someone into a real commitment. You could only make the truth clear enough that the commitment, if they made it, was real. In the training room, he started Neville where he'd started, fundamentals. "Forget everything you know about how spells work," Harry said. He was sitting cross-legged on the floor. Neville sat across from him, mirroring the position, with the attentiveness of someone who has decided to take everything seriously. "Not because it's wrong, but because you learned it while suppressed, which means you learned compensating techniques. You were working around a wall that isn't there anymore. Some of those compensations are habits now and we need to find them and replace them. How do I know which ones?" "You'll feel them." Harry paused. "When your magic flows easily, that's the right path. When it feels like pushing through something, when there's resistance that isn't the spell requiring effort but is something else, that's a habit from when you were working around the limitation." He paused. "Try the simplest thing you know." Neville raised his wand and said, "Lumos," and the tip lit. Straightforward. He looked at Harry. "Did it flow?" Harry asked. Yes. I think so." "Think so?" Neville did it again and paid attention this time, really paid attention to the internal process, the way Harry had been teaching himself to pay attention to his own magic for 3 years. He sat with it for a moment. It's like a brace. Like I brace before I do it. A little tightening. That's the habit," Harry said. "You braced because you were never sure the magic would come when you called it. It will now. Practice without the brace." He paused. "Just let it be easy." Neville tried again. And then a third time. On the 4th repetition something shifted and he felt it. Harry could see it in his face, the moment the internal resistance dropped and the spell came without friction, and the light that lit from Neville's wand was noticeably brighter and steadier. Neville looked at it. He looked at Harry. "Oh," he said. Quietly. Like someone who's found a room in their house they didn't know was there. "Yeah," Harry said. They worked for 4 hours that first day, and Neville went home tired and exhilarated and already more himself than he'd been the day before. Augusta, who met him at the portkey arrival point, looked at her grandson for a long moment when he got there, and said nothing, but her expression was the expression of someone watching something grow that they'd been afraid had died. After Neville left, Sirius found Harry in the practice room, sitting in the center with his hands resting on his knees, in the quiet stillness that Harry went to after intensive magical work. "You were good with him," Sirius said. Harry opened his eyes. "He's quick." "He is." Sirius sat down on the floor beside him with the ease of someone who'd been doing this long enough that the floor was just a reasonable place to sit. "Ragnarok called while you were in session. McGonagall came back." Harry looked at him. "She went back to Hogwarts after the meeting," Sirius continued. "She spent 3 weeks deciding. And then she apparently," a pause. "She confronted Dumbledore about the letter. The one you showed her. He must come to us needing us." Harry was very still. "What happened?" "He didn't deny it." Sirius's voice had a particular quality. "He explained it. In full. He sat across from Minerva McGonagall and told her that the sacrifice had to be real, the hardship had to be real, and that he was sorry she was troubled by it but the greater good required difficult choices." A pause. "She walked out of the meeting and contacted Ragnarok directly." Harry breathed. He thought about Dumbledore saying those words. Not with heat, not with villainy, with the calm of absolute conviction. With the certainty of a man who has decided the end so thoroughly that the means have ceased to exist as a moral category. "She's with us?" Harry said. "She's with herself," Sirius said carefully. "Which means she's going to do what she thinks is right rather than what anyone tells her, including us." A pause. "But she's not going back to him. Not after that." He looked at Harry. "She said, she asked me to tell you specifically, she said she read the letter again that night. Dumbledore's letter. And she thought about what you said. That she'd raised her objections and then deferred, and what was the point of the objections if you defer?" He paused. "She said she'd like to see you. When you're ready." Harry thought about the drawing room. About the controlled face and the eyes that were too bright. About someone who'd spent decades believing in the right version of a man who didn't exist. "She can come to the Scotland House," Harry said. "Next week, if Ragnarok clears the security." "Already done," Sirius said. They sat on the practice room floor for a while. The house was quiet around them, the good quiet of a building that had been loved for a long time. "Dumbledore knows where we are," Harry said. It wasn't a question. He'd known it for a while. "Probably," Sirius agreed. "He hasn't moved." "No. Because he's still thinking it's recoverable." Harry looked at the high ceiling of the practice room. "He thinks he can still steer this. Get me to Hogwarts under his terms, on a timeline he controls, and reassert the narrative once I'm inside his institution." A pause. "He still thinks I'm manageable." Sirius was quiet for a moment. "And are you?" Harry looked at him sideways. "What do you think?" Sirius looked back. He looked at his godson, 10 years old, sitting on a practice room floor after 4 hours of magical training, casually discussing the strategic calculations of the most powerful wizard in Britain, having in the past 3 years undone 6 years of imprisonment by goblin legal action, freed a second suppressed child, recruited a Hogwarts deputy headmistress, and built what was by any reasonable assessment an extraordinary magical foundation. He was small for 10 and his hair was still terrible and he had jam from breakfast on his left sleeve. "No," Sirius said. "I don't think you're manageable." Harry nodded. "Tell Ragnarok I want a meeting. Before Hogwarts. Before anything public." I want to talk about the timing of the disclosure document. The one he's been planning to distribute to the Wizengamot? And the Board of Governors? And the ICW? Harry paused. Dumbledore is sitting on this because he thinks he has time. I want to take the time away from him. He looked at Sirius. He gets to choose what to do if we react to him. We don't react. We move and he reacts to us. Sirius was quiet for a beat. Then he said, "Your father used to say the best Quidditch strategy was to make the other seeker chase your shadow rather than the snitch. Did it work? He was seeker for 7 years and Gryffindor won the cup 4 times. A pause. Your grandmother used to say he was the most infuriating opponent she'd ever seen. She meant it as a compliment. Good, Harry said. He stood up, stretched, and picked up his wand from where he'd set it beside him. Tomorrow Neville would be back. The day after, McGonagall. And then, piece by piece, the disclosure document and the timing of it and the careful construction of what the wizarding world would know and when. Hogwarts in September. Less than a year. He thought about Ragnarok's word, undeniable. He thought about what undeniable looked like in practice. Not a performance. Not a display. Just, walking through the doors of a school that had been designed as a trap and being so fully, completely himself that the trap had no shape to close around. He looked at the practice room. At the walls his grandparents had built and Sirius had refined and that he had spent 3 years working in, quietly, away from anyone's narrative or anyone's plan. He thought about the river and the dam and the water running clear. He thought about all of it. Then he went to find dinner, because it was 5:30 and he was hungry and tomorrow was going to be a full day. He was 10 years old and the world was about to find out what that meant. Chapter 5, The Letter That Started a War. The Hogwarts letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late July, which Harry had been expecting, and it arrived with company, which he had also been expecting, and the company was 23 additional letters delivered by a separate owl the size of a small dog that landed on the Scotland House kitchen table and regarded everyone in the room with the institutional gravity of something dispatched by a very old organization doing something it had never done before. Sirius was making toast. He looked at the large owl. He looked at the small owl from Hogwarts that had arrived 30 seconds earlier. He looked at Harry. Yours first, he said. Harry picked up the Hogwarts letter. The paper was the familiar thick cream of official magical correspondence, the envelope addressed in emerald ink, Mr. H. Potter, the Scotland House, the Highlands. Not Privet Drive. Not any of the addresses that a letter from Hogwarts was traditionally said to find its recipient at. Specifically here. Which meant either the school's enchantment was as good as advertised, or someone had updated the address. He opened it. The standard letter inside, standard in the sense of "we are pleased to inform you" and the list of supplies, had one addition that was not standard. A small card, separate, in different handwriting, tucked behind the main letter. I look forward to meeting you properly. A.D. Harry looked at it for a moment. He set it face down on the table, picked up the second packet, and handed half to Sirius. You know what those are, Sirius said. Not a question. The disclosure documents. Harry broke the seal on the top one. Identical to the version he'd approved with Ragnarok 3 weeks ago, but seeing it in final form, on the heavy cream paper Gringotts used for formal communications, with the director's seal in deep green and the signatures of the legal team ranged below, it had a weight to it. A finality. 23, he said. Every member of the Hogwarts Board of Governors, the full Wizengamot, and the ICW's British representatives. All at once, Sirius said. All at once. Harry looked at the document. It was 12 pages and contained everything: the shackles, the sacrificial binding, the financial records, the fabricated trial documents, the welfare check, the guardianship fraud. All of it, sourced, documented, annotated with Gringotts' legal seals on every page. Not inflammatory. Not a polemic. Just facts, arranged clearly, impossible to dismiss without simultaneously dismissing the institution of Gringotts itself. They'll be on people's desks by the time I board the Hogwarts Express. Sirius set his toast down. He's going to move before then. When he gets his copy this morning, he won't get one, Harry said. Sirius looked at him. He's not on the list. Harry held Sirius's gaze. He'll know within an hour because someone will send it to him. But he won't have his own copy. He'll be receiving other people's accounts of it before he gets the document itself. A pause. Ragnarok's idea. It means he's responding to other people's reading of it instead of controlling his own response to the primary source. Sirius stared at him for a moment. Ragnarok has been having too much fun. Ragnarok has been waiting 400 years to do this to someone who deserves it, Harry said. I think he's earning the fun. The owl departed. The kitchen was quiet for a moment. Then Neville arrived by portkey from the arrival point in the back garden. They'd been using it for months. Augusta had authorized the connection, and came in through the kitchen door, saw the 2 owls' worth of letters, saw Harry's expression, and said, "It happened?" "It happened," Harry said. Neville poured himself a glass of juice and sat down with the purposefulness of someone who has been preparing for a specific morning for a long time and is now ready to engage with it. In the 8 months since his suppressions had been removed, Neville had changed with the speed of something that had been compressed and released. Not dramatically, not overnight, but with a quiet, accelerating certainty. He was taller. He was clearer. His magic, once oriented to flowing naturally, had turned out to have a particular affinity that neither he nor anyone else had initially expected: combat. Defensive combat specifically, but with an aggression and precision that surprised his tutors and apparently surprised Neville himself most of all. He and Harry trained together 6 days a week. The dynamic had become, without either of them formally deciding it, genuinely equal. Harry was more advanced in theory and in the unclassified ability that was still developing its shape, but Neville had a physical intuitiveness to magical combat that Harry respected completely and was actively learning from. They pushed each other. It was the best kind of training. "What happens now?" Neville asked. "Now," Harry said, "we go to Diagon Alley for school supplies, publicly, in a week, and we let people see us." He paused. "Ragnarok wants the document to have a week to circulate before I'm visible. Let people read it and form their initial response without my face attached to it." He picked up his Hogwarts letter and put it in his pocket. "Then we give them the face." The week was informative. News, in the wizarding world, traveled through the Daily Prophet and through the older, faster medium of people talking to other people through the FLU network, and the disclosure document moved through both channels simultaneously. Harry had Griphook monitoring the Prophet, and what came back was a publication in Visible Crisis. The editors clearly knew they needed to report on a document that had been distributed to every major power center in Wizarding Britain, and equally clearly knew that reporting on it fully meant running a story that said Albus Dumbledore is a criminal in plain language. And the Prophet had spent 30 years building its relationship with the narrative of Dumbledore as the Wizarding World's irreplaceable defender. The first day, a small article on page 3. Gringotts files formal complaint against Hogwarts headmaster. Cautious, minimal, buried. Second day, the Wizengamot. Harry didn't have a direct source there, but McGonagall did. She'd sent a brief, carefully worded note that evening confirming there had been what she described as significant discussion in the session that afternoon. Albus Dumbledore had attended. He had made a statement. She didn't have the full text, but the word she used was controlled. Third day, the ICW's British representatives issued a joint statement requesting Dumbledore's formal response to the documentation within 30 days. This was not, technically, an accusation. It had the weight of one. Fourth day, the Prophet moved it to page 1. Still cautious. Questions raised over Potter case management. The language was oblique and the framing bent heavily toward innocent until proven guilty, but the story was on the front page and had a photograph of Harry, a 3-year-old file photo from Gringotts records, blurry and small, alongside Dumbledore's official portrait. Harry looked at the photograph. He thought, they'll need a better one. 5th day, Dumbledore's formal public statement arrived in the Prophet. Harry read it at the breakfast table with the attention he'd learned to give to anything Dumbledore wrote, looking past the surface of the language to the structure underneath. The statement was, technically speaking, excellent. It acknowledged the concerns. It expressed grief that the Potter child's early years had been difficult. It framed the shackles as protective measures taken in desperate wartime that had, regrettably, not been removed on schedule. It referenced the sacrificial binding briefly and obliquely as a mischaracterized protective ritual. It said nothing about the financial irregularities at all. It closed with a statement about his 40 years of service to the wizarding world and his continuing dedication to the safety of its people. He's not denying anything, Sirius said, reading over Harry's shoulder. He's recontextualizing it. Yes. Harry set the paper down. Which means he's decided a denial is unwinnable. The documentation is too solid. So he's not arguing the facts, he's arguing the interpretation. He thought about it. It's smart. He's betting that the wizarding world will accept that the actions happened but that the intentions were good, and intentions carry more weight than outcomes in a culture that's still grateful to him for Grindelwald. Will it work? Neville asked. Harry looked at him. Not completely. Some people will accept the recontextualization and stop there. Some won't. He paused. The sacrificial binding won't recontextualize cleanly. He called it mischaracterized, but he doesn't offer a different characterization, because there isn't one. A contract to kill a child is a contract to kill a child regardless of the reasoning. He paused again. And his statement doesn't mention us. Doesn't mention Sirius. He's not addressing the 6 years of wrongful imprisonment because there's no version of that story that makes him look like anything other than what he is. What's the play? Neville asked. Harry looked at the statement. At the careful, elegant, very good language of a man who had spent 70 years learning how to be believed. We go to Diagon Alley tomorrow, he said. And we let them see us. Diagon Alley on a Saturday in August was crowded. School shopping season, the narrow streets busy with families and the particular organized chaos of a public space that everyone needed to be in at the same time. Harry had been in Diagon Alley before, twice, briefly, for specific purposes with Goblin escort, but this was different. This was choosing to be seen. He went with Sirius and Neville and Griphook. No Goblin escort beyond Griphook, no formal procession, no announcement. Just 4 people walking into Flourish and Blots. The whispers started within 30 seconds of entry. Harry heard his name from 2 different directions simultaneously, and then a third, and then there was the particular quality of shift that happens in a crowd when something it's been discussing becomes present in the room. He didn't perform. That was the thing. He didn't walk in like someone aware of being watched. He walked in like someone who needed school books and knew where the section was, because Griphook had been here before and had confirmed the layout. He went to the shelf that had the first-year defense against the dark arts text, pulled it out, checked the edition. A woman to his left said, very quietly and not quite quietly enough, "That's him. Harry Potter." He looked up. Not with anything. Just the natural attention of someone who has heard their name. She was a witch in her 30s with 2 children beside her, and she had the expression of someone who had been reading the Prophet all week and was now standing next to what the Prophet had been about. She looked at his scar. She looked at his face. "I read the document," she said. Not accusatory. Not worshipful. Just, a person talking to another person. The Gringotts won. "Okay," Harry said. "Are you all right?" It was such a direct question that Harry was slightly surprised by it, though he shouldn't have been. People were going to ask it. It was the right question. He considered giving the fine answer, the social smoothing answer, and dismissed it. Getting there, he said. Thank you for asking. She nodded. She moved on. Her children stared at him for another 3 seconds, then were redirected by their mother's hand. That was one. There were 11 more direct interactions over the course of 2 hours in Diagon Alley, ranging from a very elderly wizard who pressed his hand and said nothing at all but whose eyes were very full, to a young man maybe 20 who said, with more heat than the others, "Dumbledore's given a statement. You believe it?" And Harry said, "What do you think?" back at him, and the young man thought about it and said, "Not entirely," and Harry said, "Me neither," and that was sufficient. There were also people who looked away. People who moved through a different section of the shop. People who were perfectly willing to be in the same building and not engage with the implications of being in the same building. Harry noted them without judgment. Not everyone was ready. The world did not change in a week. What stayed with him, walking back toward the leaky cauldron at the end of the afternoon with his school supplies in a bag and Neville beside him and Sirius doing a complicated job of looking casual while being absolutely alert, was the overall quality of the day. The sense of information spreading in real time. Of people holding what they'd read against what they were looking at and making assessments. He was not performing for them. But he was, deliberately and precisely, being entirely himself in public, calm, direct, not performing grievance and not performing resilience, just present and clear and real. It was the same thing he'd been doing in the Gringotts Records room and the Longbottom drawing room and the Scotland House training room for 3 years. He was just doing it where people could see. On the way out, Draco Malfoy appeared. Harry had been told about Draco Malfoy. Narcissa had been feeding intelligence to Gringotts for nearly 2 years, quietly, through channels that would have been very difficult to trace, in exchange for a guarantee of Draco's protection that Ragnarok had signed personally. The intelligence had been useful. The intelligence had also painted a picture of a boy in a difficult position, brought up in a family whose ideology was increasingly incompatible with survival and who knew it, whose father was carrying debt to Voldemort's memory in the form of the Death Eater activities that the Ministry hadn't fully prosecuted, and who was told every day of his life that the world worked in a specific way that was becoming demonstrably false. Harry had thought about Draco Malfoy occasionally in the way you think about something important that you're not yet at the right place to address. Draco was with Narcissa. Narcissa moved through Diagon Alley with the grace of someone completely in control of her appearance, which Harry recognized as the grace of someone who has to be completely in control of their appearance or the world falls apart. She was blonde and precise and she saw Harry the moment they came around the same corner, and her face did something almost invisible, a small controlled shift, the briefest acknowledgement of a situation she'd known was coming. Draco saw Harry and went through approximately 4 emotions in 2 seconds. Uncertainty. Assessment. The visible decision to perform confidence. And then, underneath all of that, something more honest. He said, "You're Potter." "Yes," Harry said. "I've read about you." He said it in the voice of someone who means everyone has been talking about you but has decided to express it as personal information. "There's been a lot to read lately," Harry agreed. Draco held his gaze. He was looking for something, for the boy who lived of the official narrative, or the pitiful orphan of the alternate version, or the dangerous radical of whatever version Lucius had been telling him. Harry didn't give him any of those because he wasn't any of those. "Hogwarts in September," Draco said. "Yes." A pause. "I'll be there." "I know," Harry said. Narcissa, beside her son, looked at Harry. Her eyes were steady and her face was beautiful and controlled and carrying something that had nothing to do with beauty or control. She looked at Sirius, they knew each other, distantly, the tangled family trees of old pure-blood families, and inclined her head fractionally. Sirius inclined his back, fractionally. They separated. Harry walked 2 steps and then said, to Sirius and Neville, quietly, "His mother is the one who's been talking to Ragnarok." "I figured," Sirius said. "He doesn't know," Harry said. "Draco doesn't know she's been doing it." "No. He will eventually." Harry thought about that. When he does, I want him to know that we kept her confidence. Whatever he decides after that is his choice. He paused. But I want him to know we were trustworthy first. Neville said, "You're not planning to be friends with him." "I'm not planning anything," Harry said honestly. "I'm planning not to assume. There's a difference." The Hogwarts Express left from King's Cross on the 1st of September, and Harry had been on a train exactly once before, a journey with Sirius to Edinburgh that Sirius had declared necessary on the grounds that Harry was 11 and had never been on a train, and this was a problem. He'd liked it. The rhythm of it, the particular kind of movement that had nowhere to be except where it was going. Platform 9 3/4 was different from what he'd expected, which was to say it was exactly as chaotic and loud and full of owls and cauldrons and families having emotional moments as it was supposed to be, but it was also full of people who had been reading the Prophet for a week and who were, in the way of a community dealing with new information about someone they were about to meet, aware of him before he was through the barrier. He came through with Sirius and Neville and Griphook, who had been given platform access on grounds that Ragnarok had not elaborated and that the ministry official responsible had not asked for elaboration on. Sirius was in a muggle jacket and managed to look simultaneously disreputable and deeply significant. Neville had his grandmother's posture, which Harry had noticed was a thing that could apparently be inherited. People looked. Some openly, some sideways. The whispers moved through the crowd with the speed of things that had been waiting to move. Harry let them. He wasn't here to be dramatic. He was here to get on a train. A large woman with a red-haired family nearby caught his eye, Arthur and Molly Weasley. He knew the names, Sirius had briefed him, and she looked at him with the particular warmth of someone who instinctively wanted to offer food and comfort to things that had been through difficult times. He smiled at her, because she'd done nothing wrong and the warmth was genuine. One of the red-haired boys, the youngest one, roughly his age, was looking at him with transparent fascination and rather less subtlety than any of the adults. He didn't look for Dumbledore. He didn't need to. He could feel the shape of the absence, the particular way the platform didn't have a white-bearded figure in purple robes somewhere prominent the way it perhaps historically had, because Dumbledore was at Hogwarts, on his own ground, deciding how to receive what was coming. He said goodbye to Sirius on the platform. Sirius hugged him once, hard, the way he'd learned to hug over 3 years, not awkward anymore, not tentative, just real. He said, against the top of Harry's head, "Don't burn the school down on the first day." "That's very specific advice," Harry said. "I have specific concerns. I'm not going to burn the school down." "I know." Sirius let him go and looked at him. "I know you're not." He paused, and for a moment he looked very much like someone who had 6 years back to account for and was aware of how much had been rebuilt in 3. "Go be extraordinary." "I was going to be ordinary," Harry said. "Really blend in." Sirius's face did the thing where he was laughing and trying not to. "Get on the train." Harry got on the train. Neville was right behind him. They found a compartment and Harry dropped his bag and sat down and looked out at the platform and watched Sirius watching the train and thought about the river and what it felt like to run clear all the way out to wherever rivers end. Then Neville said, "Do you think the trolley comes through before or after we leave the station?" And Harry turned away from the window and said, "After, definitely," and it was, on the whole, an ordinary beginning. The train had been moving for about 40 minutes and the platform had become the outskirts of London, had become the open green of the countryside when the compartment door opened and Hermione Granger came in and said, very directly, "All the other compartments are full. May I sit here?" Harry and Neville both looked at her. She was small and bushy-haired and carrying a book and had the manner of someone who has decided they prefer directness over the social performance of casualness. "Yes," Harry said. She sat. She opened her book. She read for approximately 30 seconds and then looked up. "You're Harry Potter," she said. Not with awe. With the tone of someone consulting a fact. "Yes. I've read about you. Not just the Prophet, I read the Gringotts document. My parents are Muggles, They had it explained to them by our family's magical liaison and I asked to read the original. She paused. It's very clearly sourced. The sacrificial binding documentation in particular is remarkably solid. Harry looked at her with genuine interest. You understood the binding documentation? Most of it. The third section on soul contract termination required some external research. She said this without any self-consciousness. I'm Hermione Granger. This is Neville Longbottom? Yes, said Neville, with the mildly surprised expression of someone who has not yet gotten used to being recognized. I read about your family in celebrated families of the modern era. Your parents were extraordinary aurors. She paused. I'm sorry about what happened to them. Neville went slightly still. Then, with the steadiness that had become his default register, thank you. She opened her book again. Harry watched her for a moment. Then, what's your wand? She looked up. Vine wood and dragon heartstring. 10 3/4 inches. Reasonably supple. She paused. Yours? Holly and phoenix feather. 11 inches. He'd had it for a year, Ollivander's, the wand having found him in the shop with what Ollivander had described as unusual alacrity and with an expression that said something significant was happening that Harry was not getting the full story on. He'd looked into it afterward. He had theories. The phoenix feather wand paired with the holly is an interesting combination, Hermione said. Holly is traditionally associated with protection and transformation. Phoenix feather cores are particularly responsive to deep magical channels. She paused. Given what the diagnostic said about your core, she stopped. Sorry. That was forward. No, Harry said. I like forward. He paused. You think my wand's responding to the unclassified ability? It's a hypothesis. She glanced at her book. I've been thinking about the diagnostic notes from the Gringotts ritual report. The ability description they used, depth beyond categorized parameters, is unusual. The only historical record I found of similar language is in a 14th century text on what they called resonance magic. The idea that some witches and wizards can access the underlying structure of magic itself rather than just its surface applications. She paused. I could be entirely wrong. I've been wrong before. Not often though, I'm guessing, Neville said. She looked at him. Something in her expression suggested she was deciding whether to treat this as a compliment. She decided it was one. No, she said, honestly. Not very often. Harry thought about the garden and the flattened grass and the sky going violet. He thought about depth like looking into water that turned out to be 30 feet. He thought about Ragnarok saying come back when you've had more contact with it. I think you might be right, he said. Hermione looked at him with those assessing eyes, recalibrating something. You already know, don't you? I have a hypothesis, Harry said. She smiled. It was a quick, precise smile, the smile of someone who doesn't deploy it often and means it when they do. Tell me if you want a second opinion, she said, and went back to her book. Harry sat back and looked out the window at the moving landscape and thought, 3. That was 3. Neville and Hermione. The people who saw and came anyway, who didn't need him to perform or explain or be anything other than exactly what he was. His mother had been right. Hogwarts came into view in the early evening, the castle on the hill above the lake, lit against the darkening sky with the gold of 100 windows. It was larger than Harry had expected and older, the kind of large and old that had weight to it, that pressed down pleasantly on the sense of scale you carried around in daily life. He looked at it from the boats, first years in boats, tradition, Hagrid enormous and kind and clearly trying not to stare at Harry's scar while Harry was right there, and felt the magic of the castle from across the water. That was new. He hadn't expected to feel it from outside. But the castle was an entity of its own, centuries of magic layered into the stones, the wards, the enchantments, the accumulated presence of thousands of students and hundreds of years of learning. He felt it the way the elemental resonance felt things, not through his skin but through the deeper layer, the thing Hermione had called resonance magic. It felt enormous and ancient and, underneath that, welcoming. Like a very old thing that had seen a great deal and was interested in seeing more. He thought, this is where my parents learned everything they knew. The thought was clear and uncomplicated and full. The sorting was in the great hall, which was exactly as described and also more than that. The enchanted ceiling showed a cloudy September night, the 4 long tables full of older students, the faculty at the high table at the front. Harry walked in with the other first years and felt 100 conversations stop. Not pause. Stop. The whole room doing the thing the crowd in Flourish and Blots had done, the presence of someone the room had been thinking about meeting. He didn't look for Dumbledore immediately. He scanned the high table from habit. Ragnarok had given him descriptions of most of the faculty, and found him 3 seconds in, almost without meaning to. Albus Dumbledore was at the center of the high table in robes of deep blue, white-bearded, half-moon glasses, the portrait made flesh. He was watching Harry with those famously blue eyes across the length of the great hall, and his expression was complex. Something that had layers to it that Harry couldn't fully read from this distance. Harry looked at him. He held the gaze for 1 second, 2, 3. Not challenging. Not performing anything. Just looking, with the same clarity he looked at everything. Dumbledore looked away first. McGonagall was at the end of the table with the sorting hat and stool. She met Harry's eyes briefly when he came through the door and her expression was controlled and precise, and underneath that, something that had been building for a year of private conversations and 3 months of formal decisions. The sorting proceeded. Names were called. Harry stood with the other first years and watched, taking in the houses, the reactions, the specific way the hall organized itself into loyalties and identities before anyone had done anything to earn them. He thought about what Ragnarok had said about narratives and how they worked, about which house the official version of Harry Potter was supposed to go to, and what it would mean if he went somewhere else, and whether that mattered to him or not. He'd thought about it for a while, actually. He'd discussed it with Sirius, who had predictable opinions, with Neville, who was characteristically direct, with Hermione on the train, who had given him a 6-point analysis of the sociological implications of house placement that was both genuinely useful and slightly terrifying. Potter, Harry. The hall did the stop again. Complete and immediate. He walked up to the stool and sat down, and McGonagall placed the sorting hat on his head. It was immediately not like having a hat placed on your head. It was like a room opening. A presence, old and dry and intelligent, settling around his awareness with the practiced ease of something that had been doing this for 1,000 years. Well, said the hat, in a voice that was somehow both inside his head and exterior to it. There you are. Here I am, Harry thought back. I've been waiting. I felt you coming from the moment you reached the grounds. A pause that had weight in it. You know, you are the most interesting case I have encountered in 43 years. What was 43 years ago? A girl with a particular kind of mind. You'd get along. The hat seemed to settle more deeply. Plenty of Gryffindor in you, the courage is genuine, it's not performance. Your father would approve. A pause. But you have Ravenclaw's mind and Slytherin's strategic awareness and, unusually, the loyalty of Hufflepuff running underneath everything else, which people tend to overlook in you because the rest is louder. A longer pause. The question is where you want to be. Where do you think I need to be? Harry asked. Need is a complicated word. The hat's presence shifted. The instinct is Gryffindor. The equipment is broader than a single house. And you have something, that deep channel your goblin friends noted, that doesn't correspond to house values at all, because it predates the concept. A pause. Where do you want to be? Where people don't already have a story about me, Harry thought. Where I have to build it. Interesting answer. A pause. Most people want home. You want territory. Is there a house for that? The hat made a sound that was recognizably a laugh. Slytherin. The hall exploded. Not into applause, into sound, a general eruption of noise that was too complex to be just applause or just protest or just surprise, that was all of those things simultaneously. Harry sat on the stool for a moment with the hat on his head and the hall making that sound, and he thought, good. The hat lifted. Harry stood. McGonagall's face was unreadable in the way of someone who has prepared for multiple outcomes and is now living in a specific one that requires composure. Neville was at the Gryffindor table. He'd gone before Harry, immediate and certain, Gryffindor through and through, and he caught Harry's eye across the hall and made a gesture that managed to convey of course and brilliant and you absolute menace simultaneously. Hermione was sorted shortly after. Gryffindor had barely touched her head. She looked at Harry's placement across the hall with an expression that said she was immediately constructing a hypothesis about the strategic implications and would like to discuss them at the earliest opportunity. Harry walked to the Slytherin table. Sat down. The students around him were doing the assessment, the same assessment Draco had done in Diagon Alley, looking for the version of Harry Potter that matched the one they'd expected. He didn't give them anything to match against. He sat down, poured himself water, and waited for dinner to appear. Draco Malfoy slid into the seat across from him approximately 4 seconds later. Slytherin, Draco said. He was doing a good job of keeping his expression neutral, but his eyes were doing something more complicated. Apparently, Harry said. My father thought, he stopped. Started again. The prophet said you'd be Gryffindor. The prophet has been wrong about me fairly consistently, Harry said. Why start trusting it now? A ghost of something moved across Draco's face. Then, my mother said, she said something, before I left. She said I should talk to you. He held Harry's gaze. She said you were the only person in my year I should make sure to actually speak to. He paused. She didn't say why. She probably had reasons, Harry said. She usually does. A pause. So I'm speaking to you. I noticed. Harry looked at him. At the careful performance of confidence and the honest uncertainty underneath it. At a boy whose mother had been quietly brave in a way he didn't yet know about, for reasons that were going to eventually require explanation. How's that going? Draco blinked. Then, slowly, the performance dropped by a fraction. It's going all right, he said. Good, Harry said. Dinner appeared. The hall around them was still buzzing, the news of Harry Potter and Slytherin moving through the room in waves, reaching the high table where Dumbledore was sitting with an expression that Harry would have paid money to read clearly from 50 feet. Harry helped himself to food without haste and listened to the conversations around him at the Slytherin table, cautious, probing, the particular register of children taught to be strategic, deploying strategy in real time, and ate properly, which was still something he actively appreciated, and thought about the year ahead. After dinner, before the prefect led the first years to the dungeons, Harry looked up at the high table. Dumbledore was watching him. Had been, probably, for most of the meal. Harry looked back at him. Calm and clear and without any of the deference or need or aching dependence that the man had planned his entire strategy around. He looked back at Albus Dumbledore and let his eyes say everything they needed to. I know what you did. I know who you are. I am here and I am nothing like what you designed. Dumbledore's expression didn't change. He was too practiced for that. But something behind his eyes shifted. Something that had been calculating recalculated. The chessboard revised. The game acknowledging a piece that had moved itself to a position that changed everything. Harry looked away. Picked up his bag. Followed the prefect. The dungeons were cool and stone-walled and lit with greenish light and felt ancient in the way the whole castle felt ancient, layers on layers. Harry walked through them and felt the castle around him, enormous and present, and thought about what Hermione had said on the train. Resonance magic. Access to the underlying structure. He touched a wall as they walked. Stone, centuries old, held together by magic as much as by mortar, and through the resonance he felt the castle the way you feel a pulse, deep and regular and alive. It recognized the contact. Something in the stones oriented toward him for a moment, like a very large, very old animal acknowledging a familiar. Harry took his hand off the wall. He walked into the Slytherin common room, which was all dark wood and green light and the particular atmosphere of a room that had housed ambitious people for 1,000 years and didn't care about your feelings, only your intelligence. He looked around the room. He looked at the students who would be his housemates for 7 years, looking back at him. He was 11 years old and this was the beginning of the part where everything he'd built in private would have to hold up in the open. He thought it would. Chapter 6. The first move in the oldest game. Ragnarok had told Harry about the Philosopher's Stone in October. Not as a warning, more as a briefing, the way Ragnarok told him most things, with the flat informational directness of someone who considered knowledge a basic right rather than a privilege to be metered out. Nicholas Flamel. The stone. Dumbledore's arrangement to store it at Hogwarts, away from Gringotts, which Ragnarok had noted with the particular controlled disapproval of someone who had watched an asset moved somewhere less secure and had been unable to stop it. The stone is in the school, Ragnarok had said, in the Scotland House, 3 weeks before the Hogwarts Express. Quirinus Quirrell is the defense against the dark arts professor this year. He is also a host. A host for what? Harry had asked, though he'd had a suspicion. What is left of Voldemort? Ragnarok said the name without hesitation, the way he said most things that other people found unsayable. A fragment. Not a resurrection, not nearly enough power for that. A parasite, feeding on Quirrell's life force and seeking a path back to a physical form. The stone is the most direct route available to him. He'd paused. He will make a move for it before the end of the year. We are relatively certain of this. Harry had sat with that for a moment. Does Dumbledore know? He knows about Quirrell. We believe he knows. Ragnarok's tone had been careful. Whether he plans to stop it or allow it to run its natural course and use the outcome strategically is, currently unclear. That had stayed with Harry. Use the outcome strategically. He'd thought about it for 3 months, through September and October and November, while the school year organized itself around him. He'd thought about what the natural course of events looked like. An 11-year-old stumbling onto a conspiracy through curiosity and luck, making a desperate run through a gauntlet of obstacles to protect a stone they didn't know they were protecting, confronting a possessed professor alone, and either surviving by the same miraculous grace that had survived the original killing curse or not surviving. Depending on how much of the plan Dumbledore still believed was operational. He'd thought about that quite a bit. The school had been, in every other respect, genuinely interesting. The Slytherin common room was cold and political and Harry had come to enjoy it the way you enjoy a game that requires real attention. His housemates were smart, mostly, some aggressively so, and they related to power with a directness that Harry found more honest than the coded versions of the same instinct he'd observed in other houses. They'd spent the first 3 weeks testing him, the way you test anything new that shows up in your territory, and he'd passed those tests not by performing strength but simply by being himself, clear, straightforward, unimpressed by status performance, unwilling to be managed. By October the testing had mostly stopped and something else had replaced it, a cautious, calculating interest that was close enough to respect to function the same way. Draco was a constant. Not a friend yet, Harry was precise about these categories, but something that was building toward one through the particular alchemy of daily proximity and mutual assessment. Draco had come to Hogwarts carrying his father's ideology like luggage he hadn't packed himself, and each week Harry watched him quietly set another piece of it down and not pick it back up. Not because Harry told him to. Because Draco was intelligent, and intelligence, in the right conditions, is corrosive to inherited certainty. What moved things between them was a Tuesday in November when Harry found Draco in the library with a copy of the Gringotts disclosure document that he'd clearly obtained from somewhere unofficial, reading it with the focused tension of someone processing a significant revision. Harry sat down across from him. Draco looked up. His expression was doing what Draco's expressions did when he hadn't prepared for a specific interaction, several things at once, none of them the performed version. "Your mother knew," Harry said. Draco went very still. "Not all of it. But she knew enough to move first." Harry kept his voice level. "She's been careful and she's been right and she's been protecting you." A pause. "I'm telling you because you're going to find out eventually, and I'd rather you hear it from me than from someone who doesn't understand why she did it." Draco looked at him for a long moment. He looked at the document. He looked back at Harry. "Did Ragnarok tell you to tell me this?" "No," Harry said. "Ragnarok told me to tell you nothing. I'm telling you anyway because it's yours to know." He paused. "That's different from strategy." Draco absorbed this. "My father is going to, your father's position is going to get significantly worse before the year is over," Harry said. "That's not a threat. It's what the political situation looks like." He held Draco's gaze. "Your mother is on the right side of it. That's all I'm saying." Draco looked down at the document for a moment. Then, "She always liked her own counsel better than his." "Smart woman," Harry said. Aggressively, Draco agreed, and his voice had something in it that was private and real and nothing like the performed version of himself he usually deployed. They left the library separately. Something had settled. In defense against the dark arts, Quirrell was bad at his job, which Harry suspected was deliberate, the stutter, the apparent incompetence, all of it designed to look harmless. But when you were watching for the thing underneath, it was there. A stillness that the stutter covered. Eyes that moved in rooms with the habit of something tracking exits. The particular quality that Harry had noticed Sirius sometimes had, the awareness of a person who had spent time in very dangerous situations and had survival as a background process that never fully switched off. Except in Quirrell's case, the thing underneath wasn't survival instinct. It was something older and colder and more deliberate. Harry sat in defense class and watched Quirrell explain basic shield charms with theatrical incompetence and thought about what Ragnarok had said, a parasite, feeding on Quirrell's life force. He thought about what it would feel like to have something inhabiting you. He thought about Shackles. Different shape, same category. He didn't let on that he noticed. He asked questions that sounded like a student finding the material difficult. He got 12 things wrong on purpose in October. He got 8 things wrong in November. He let Quirrell believe what Quirrell needed to believe. By December he knew, from Griphook's regular briefings and from his own observation, that Voldemort was getting closer to moving. The quality of Quirrell's attention had sharpened. There were conversations that stopped when students approached. There was a particular frequency of nighttime activity in the corridors that the Marauder's map, a gift from Sirius, delivered by Owl in October with a note that said your father would have wanted you to have this, tracked with useful precision. He knew about the trapdoor. He knew about Fluffy. He'd spent an afternoon in the restricted section working through a list of spell and creature names that corresponded to the obstacle sequence, and then an evening with Hermione confirming the research, and then 3 days with Neville, who he'd briefed fully, because Neville was his partner in this as in everything, walking through the logic of the trap. Dumbledore designed this, Hermione had said, on the third evening, the three of them in an empty classroom, the research spread between them. She said it the way she said things she was certain of and wished she wasn't. The obstacles. He designed them to be defeatable by a specific kind of person in a specific kind of desperate circumstance. She paused. First-year level magic. Enough to require effort but not enough to stop an 11-year-old who was, really motivated. Motivated by what? Neville asked. By being afraid and alone and not having another option, Harry said. Hermione looked at him. Yes. Exactly. They sat with that. He's still running the original plan, Harry said. Or a version of it. He knows about Quirrell and he's letting it develop because the scenario it produces is useful to him. He paused. If I go through those obstacles alone, scared, and come out the other side by sheer luck and love magic, the narrative he needs is intact. The boy who lived, living again. His weapon, proved. The sacrifice postponed but still valid. And if Quirrell gets the stone? Neville asked. Then Dumbledore manages the fallout and moves the timeline. Still useful. Different flavor. Harry looked at the map. The scenario that breaks his plan is the one where none of that happens. Where there's no desperate scramble, no lucky escape, no narrative of the chosen boy barely surviving against impossible odds. He paused. He needs me afraid and reactive. So we're going to be prepared and deliberate instead. We, Hermione said. Not a question. A position. If you want to be. She looked at her research notes. She looked at Harry and Neville with an expression that had processed the risk and was committing anyway. Obviously, she said, in the tone of someone for whom the answer had been decided well before the question was asked. He sent a letter to Ragnarok the next morning. Not a long one. 3 sentences describing what he intended and asking for one specific piece of information that Griphook's briefings hadn't covered. The reply came back in 4 hours, which was Ragnarok at his most prompt, confirming the one piece of information and adding, at the bottom of the letter, in handwriting that was extremely controlled, "Do not get killed." The paperwork would be considerable. Harry had smiled at that for a genuine moment. The move came in the second week of December, 2 days before the end of term. Harry had been watching Quirrell for signs of specific readiness, the preparation that preceded action rather than the general ongoing alertness, and he saw it on a Monday evening, Quirrell leaving dinner early, a particular quality of decision in the way he moved, the stutter absent for 3 full seconds in a way that had nothing to do with forgetting it was there. Harry sent a wordless message to Neville via the enchanted coin system Hermione had designed, her architecture, Harry and Neville's magic to power it, and went back to his dinner and ate everything on his plate without hurrying. That night, at 1 in the morning, the 3 of them met in the corridor outside the 3rd-floor bathroom. Neville was in dark clothes with his wand held with the easy readiness of someone who had spent 8 months training seriously. He looked at Harry and said nothing, which was the right thing. Hermione had a bag. Harry knew what was in it. He'd approved the contents. She'd thought of 3 things he hadn't. If at any point this becomes genuinely unmanageable, Harry said, we pull back and I call Ragnarok directly. The contingency port key is active. He patted his pocket. We don't do this for heroics. We do this to stop it from going the way it was designed to go. He looked at both of them. Clear. Clear, Neville said. Perfectly clear, Hermione said. Harry opened the bathroom door. Fluffy was awake, which was less than ideal, and then Harry touched the floor with his hand and let the elemental resonance go sideways, not into the dog but into the stone beneath it, the deep magic of the castle itself, and sent something through the structure that was less a command than a suggestion. Quiet. Sleep. Nothing to threaten here. The castle, which had been orienting toward Harry since the first night, turned that suggestion into something structural, and Fluffy yawned once, a sound like a building settling, and lay down. Hermione looked at the sleeping 3-headed dog and then at Harry. Did you just? Yes, Harry said. It's a thing I can do. He lifted the trapdoor. They dropped. Devil's Snare was Hermione's, she had the specific botanical knowledge and the light charm was out before Harry had fully oriented. She did it without fuss, quickly, the plant releasing its grip with the resigned air of something that had evolved to stop people who weren't prepared and was dealing with prepared people. The keys were Neville's, which had not been the plan but became the plan when Neville looked at the hundreds of flying keys for half a second and then said, "There," pointing to a specific one with the precision of someone whose spatial awareness and reflexes had been running at full capacity for 8 months. He had it in 12 seconds. Harry and Hermione watched him with the appreciation of people watching someone do something they're genuinely good at. The chess set was Harry. Not because Neville and Hermione couldn't have managed it but because the chess set was watching all three of them and making assessments, and Harry felt it through the resonance as a magical construct of intermediate complexity that was fundamentally responsive to confidence. He walked to the White Queen's position, ignored the pieces that moved to block him, and told the board in the language it was built to hear, not words, deeper than words, the underlying instruction, "We are not your game." The pieces went still. The path opened. Hermione's hand found his arm for a moment as they passed through. She said nothing. The grip said enough. The troll was already down. Someone had beaten them to it, a separate intervention, and Harry filed that with interest for later, wondering who had been doing what for reasons he didn't yet have. They stepped over it. The potions room had Hermione's full attention for approximately 90 seconds, and the solution was so elegant that Harry felt a specific kind of appreciation for someone whose mind moved the way hers did. Logic where the others expected magic. She'd clearly been preparing for this room specifically and had worked out a variant on the solution that allowed all three of them to pass without division, which the original design had not accounted for. "How long did that take you?" Harry asked. 3 weeks on and off, she said, with the complete lack of false modesty that Harry liked about her. "I kept finding new variables." "Well done," Neville said. She looked pleased in the way of someone who doesn't know quite what to do with being told well done, and then organized the pleased into forward momentum. The mirror room. Quirrell was there. Of course he was. He'd had a 45-minute head start and he'd moved through the obstacles with the urgency of someone who had been planning this for months, and he'd hit the final room and found the mirror and found that the mirror was not cooperating, and the not cooperating was clearly something he had not expected. He was standing in front of the mirror of Ariste with his wand out and his face twisted with an expression that was partly Quirrell's fear and partly something else, the thing living in Quirrell making its calculations visible through his borrowed face. The mirror showed him nothing useful. It was designed to show the pure of heart, and Voldemort, using Quirrell's heart, was not getting anything except his own reflection back, and the reflection was Quirrell, and what Quirrell wanted was not to be dying from the inside, which the stone could not give him. Harry walked into the room. Quirrell spun. The something in his eyes sharpened. "Potter," Quirrell said, and the stutter was completely gone, and the voice that came out had a quality underneath Quirrell's voice that Harry had heard described and was worse in person, the particular resonance of something that had once had enormous power and was now operating through badly damaged equipment and was furious about it. "How wonderfully inevitable." "Professor," Harry said. He stopped 10 feet back. Neville was to his left and slightly behind. Hermione to his right. He'd asked them to hold position here unless things shifted, and they had. Quirrell's head tilted. "You brought friends." This seemed to genuinely confuse Voldemort. Not strategically, emotionally. The concept of Harry Potter with friends had not been accounted for. "Most people have them," Harry said. "The Gryffindor boy and the, Quirrell's eyes moved to Hermione and Neville with the quality of something making quick updated assessments. "The Longbottom heir. And Granger." "Yes. I see." A pause. "You are not here because you stumbled onto this." "No," Harry said. "Dumbledore's trap." Quirrell's mouth curved. "He wanted you to come here in desperation. Find me at the mirror. Some dramatic confrontation, the power of love and sacrifice saving the day, the story continuing for another chapter." His voice was cold and precise and stripped of any remaining performance. "He has been running that story for 10 years. You, apparently, are not following the script." "I burned the script," Harry said. "Some time ago." Quirrell studied him. You have power. I can feel that from here. More than you should. A pause. The shackles are gone. Something moved in the borrowed face, a complicated thing, not quite respect, not quite hunger. He underestimated you badly. He underestimated several people, Harry said. That's what happens when you spend long enough treating people as chess pieces. You start forgetting they move themselves. Quirrell was quiet. The fire mirror light moved across his face. Then, give me the stone. No. I will kill you, Potter. I do not require you alive. Whatever Dumbledore's plan needed you for, I have no use for the same constraints. You should know, Harry said, that I have a port key that calls the Gringotts Emergency Response Team. They'd be here in 4 minutes. He held Quirrell's gaze. But before it comes to that, I want to offer you something. Quirrell stared. Offer me information. Harry took one step forward. You are operating on 10 years of out-of-date intelligence. Things have changed significantly. The wizarding world is not what you left. The political situation is not what you expect. He paused. I'm not your ally. I'm not offering cooperation. I'm offering the truth, because I think you're going to make decisions in the next year based on a picture of the world that is substantially wrong, and those decisions are going to hurt a lot of people who don't deserve it. The something in Quirrell's face went very still. Listening. Not to an offer, to the quality of the person making it. You have been hiding in forests and foreign lands for 10 years, Harry said. You found Quirrell because you were weak enough to need a host. You found me at Hogwarts because Dumbledore set the stage for it. Everything you know about your position, your resources, your path to restoration, you learned it while you were barely alive and operating through someone else's eyes. He paused. I'm not afraid of you. I want to be clear about that. But I'm also not interested in a fight that doesn't need to happen tonight. You are 11 years old, Quirrell said. His voice had a different quality now. Something trying to recalibrate. Yes, Harry said. And you are a shade of a Dark Lord who couldn't kill a baby and has spent the decades since trying to recover. Neither of us is in the position we're supposed to be in. He held the gaze steadily. The stone is not here for you. It's not accessible to you, the mirror won't show you it because you can't want it purely enough, and that design is not circumventable. You know this. You've been standing here for 40 minutes and you know this. A pause. Quirrell knows it too. A visible tremor ran through Quirrell's body. Something pushed back down. Voldemort regaining purchase. You think you can negotiate, Quirrell said. The voice was colder now, the warmth of the almost conversation pressed back under the weight of something that did not experience warmth. I think I can tell you that killing me tonight is not the strategic choice it looks like, Harry said. I think that somewhere in you there's enough political intelligence left to weigh that. He paused. You kill me, Gringotts declares open war on you personally. Not a legal war. A resource war. Every network, every safe house, every channel of magical commerce in Britain is closed to whatever allies you rebuild. Ragnarok takes it personally. He tilted his head slightly. You don't get the stone, you don't get a new body, and you acquire the most well-resourced institutional enemy in the magical world in exchange for murdering a child who was already not following the plan you needed him to follow. He paused. That's a bad trade. Quirrell, Voldemort, was silent. The room was silent. The mirror showed nothing useful to either of them. Then Quirrell made a move. It wasn't toward Harry. It was toward the door, a fast pivot, a burst of magic thrown backward as distraction, a move designed to clear the room and leave before the situation worsened. Voldemort, whatever his other qualities, was not strategically stupid. Harry had laid out the arithmetic and the arithmetic was unfavorable. Neville's shield charm hit the throne magic before Harry had finished processing the motion, clean and automatic and very good, the force of it absorbed completely. Hermione was already moving, not attacking, redirecting, a containment charm that Harry had never specifically taught her and that she had clearly worked out from first principles and refined in private, because that was the kind of person Hermione was. Quirrell hit the containment, staggered, and the thing inside him made a decision. It left. Not dramatically. Not with a speech or a declaration or a flash of dark light. It just separated from Quirrell with the quiet efficiency of something that had been holding on by its fingernails and had concluded that this particular grip was no longer viable. Quirrell collapsed. The shape that rose from him for a moment, barely visible, barely there, grey and furious and deeply diminished, passed through the room like cold air moving. Harry watched it go with the resonance fully open and felt it as a thing that had been great and had reduced itself through years of catastrophic choices to something that could barely maintain cohesion, and it was still dangerous and still Voldemort, but it was not, right now, something that could fight. It left through the stone. Harry felt it go. He crossed the room and knelt beside Quirrell. The professor was alive, barely, with the quality of someone whose life force had been used down to the dregs over 9 months. His eyes were open and their expression was something that had been waiting, Harry thought, for a long time. "Is it gone?" Quirrell's voice was barely there. "Yes," Harry said. Quirrell exhaled. It was a long sound. "I didn't," he stopped. Started again. "I didn't know, at first. What he was. What it would cost." "I know," Harry said. "He gets into you." A pause. "He gets into the thing you want and he makes it seem like he can give it to you, and by the time you understand." "I know," Harry said again. He looked at the man's face. The authentic face, under all the months of Voldemort's occupation. "We're going to get you to a healer." He reached into his pocket and activated the portkey. The Gringotts response team arrived in 3 minutes and 40 seconds, which was faster than the 4 Harry had quoted and which probably reflected Ragnarok having set the timer from the moment Harry said in the second week of December. 2 of them were healers. They went directly to Quirrell. The other 2 swept the room with professional thoroughness and established a perimeter without being asked. Harry stood back and let them work. He stood between Neville and Hermione in the mirror room in the 7th-floor corridor of Hogwarts, in the place where the trap had been set, watching the trap get disassembled by people who had been ready for it. "Is he going to be okay?" Hermione asked, quietly, looking at Quirrell. "The healers will know more than me," Harry said. "But he's alive. That's something." "You warned Voldemort," Neville said. "Not accusatory. Just noting it." "I told him the truth," Harry said. "He can do what he wants with it." He paused. "He'll be back. Not tonight, not this year, but eventually. He's been reduced but he hasn't been finished. We haven't finished anything tonight. We've just interrupted a sequence that was supposed to run without interruption." He looked at them. "That matters. But it's not an ending." "It's a beginning," Hermione said. Harry looked at her. "Yes. Exactly." The door to the room opened. Albus Dumbledore walked in. He looked at Quirrell, unconscious and receiving healer attention. He looked at the 2 goblin security specialists standing at points around the room. He looked at the mirror, which showed him something that he composed his expression against with practiced grace. He looked at Harry, and Neville, and Hermione. And then he looked at Harry specifically, and the look had many things in it: surprise, calculation, something that was close to genuine emotion and was very carefully managed, and Harry looked back and waited. "Harry," Dumbledore said. His voice was the warm, gentle, deeply practiced voice of a man who had spent 70 years knowing exactly how to speak to people. It was an excellent voice. "Are you all right?" "Fine," Harry said. He kept his voice even. He kept it ordinary. Not cold, cold would be a performance. Quirrell needs a proper medical facility. The Gringotts team is taking him. Dumbledore looked at Quirrell. At the healers. At the goblins. You, called Gringotts. I prepared for this in October, Harry said. When I realized where the year was going. The silence between them had texture. Dumbledore's eyes moved around the room, the careful intelligence of someone reading a scene. Looking at the obstacles behind them, presumably intact since they'd come through cleanly. Looking at the 3 11-year-olds standing without injuries, without panic, with the settled quality of people who had done what they came to do. You knew about Quirrell, Dumbledore said. Quietly. Yes. And you came here, not because you found out and panicked, but because you planned it, Harry said. Yes. The pause that followed was long. Dumbledore looked at him with those blue eyes that Harry had looked at across the great hall on the first night, and this time Harry was close enough to read them more clearly. What he saw was not a villain. What he saw was genuinely the most complicated thing he'd encountered in the past 3.5 years, a man who had done monstrous things and believed, with the deep and terrible sincerity of the fully convinced, that he'd had no other choice. A man who was looking at the current scene and understanding, in real time, that the architecture he'd spent 11 years building had produced something he had not designed. The stone, Dumbledore said. Still in the mirror, Harry said. The mirror worked correctly. He couldn't get it. A pause. You should probably arrange for it to go back to Flamel. Properly this time. Through Gringotts. He held Dumbledore's gaze. Ragnarok will handle the transport. It'll be safer. Something moved in Dumbledore's expression at that. The particular quality of a man hearing a sentence that is ostensibly about logistics and is actually about something much larger. I see, he said. I don't think you do yet, Harry said, simply. But you will. He turned to Neville and Hermione. We should go back to the dormitories. It's nearly 2 a.m. and tomorrow's a full day. Neville moved immediately. Hermione gathered her bag with the precision of someone who was resisting the strong pull to stay and observe the conversation, and who had decided that Harry's judgment was sound even when she wanted to make a different choice herself. She looked at Dumbledore once, a direct, assessing look, the look of someone who had read 12 pages of documentation and was now looking at the subject of them, and then turned and went. Harry moved toward the door. Then he stopped. He half turned back, because there was one thing that needed to be said, one thing that was not about strategy or information or positioning. One thing that was just, true. Quirrell will need someone to speak for him at the inquiry, Harry said. He was a host. He was used against his will. I'll speak for him myself if necessary, but he should have proper legal representation. He paused. Can you see to that? Dumbledore looked at him. Yes, he said. I can see to that. Thank you, Harry said. He walked out of the room. In the corridor, Neville came up beside him, and Hermione fell in on the other side, and the three of them walked through the castle toward the staircases in the particular quiet of people who have done something significant and are letting it settle. The castle was dark around them and the portraits slept in their frames and the magic of the stones hummed under Harry's feet with that deep regular pulse he'd felt since the first night. He's going to move differently now, Hermione said. Not a question. Thinking out loud. After tonight. Whatever he was planning next, he has to revise. Yes, Harry said. Is that good or bad? It's different, Harry said. Which is what we needed. The original sequence was bad. This is unmapped territory for all of us, including him. He paused. Unmapped is better than a trap. For us, Neville said. For us, Harry agreed. For him it's harder. He's better with a plan. They came to the staircase. The moving steps shifted, carrying them upward through the layers of the castle. Harry looked through a tall window at the grounds below, the lake, the dark line of the forbidden forest, the sky beginning to suggest dawn in the very far distance. The snow on the grounds was blue-white and untouched, and the whole landscape had the quality of something that had been waiting, patient, in the way of things that have been waiting for a very long time and have decided they're not in a hurry. He thought about Ragnarok saying undeniable in a Scotland house kitchen in what felt like a different life. He thought about a dying goblin in a Surrey garden and amber eyes and a grip that hadn't let go. He thought about his mother's letter, "I can't wait for you to find that out." He thought about a journal with 3 sentences on the last page and 14 months of memories coming back one dream at a time, his father's laugh and his mother's quick handwriting and the particular quality of love that got into a room and stayed there even after everything. He thought about Sirius. He thought about Neville with his hands open and magic finally running through them. He thought about Hermione on the train with a book and a direct question. He thought about Draco in the library, quietly setting things down. He thought about the river running clear. The next morning, a letter arrived at breakfast from Ragnarok. 4 words, in the director's precise handwriting, satisfying. What comes next? Harry read it at the Slytherin table with the hall around him doing its usual morning business, the noise and the food and the specific atmosphere of 500 people beginning their day, and he thought about what came next. Voldemort reduced and loose and planning. Dumbledore revising his architecture and still convinced that the game was his to manage. A political situation that was cracked in several places and not yet broken. A year of school ahead, and then another, and another. He thought about Neville in the seat he'd saved at the Gryffindor table, eating toast with the settled ease of someone who knows where he is and what he can do. He thought about Hermione already in the library at 7 in the morning, probably 3 hypotheses deep into whatever last night had suggested to her. He thought about Draco, who had started leaving books on Harry's bed, just leaving them, no note, the specific titles tracking a private journey of revised assumptions that was too honest to declare openly. He thought about the castle itself, ancient and enormous and somehow, specifically, oriented toward him, the way it had been since the first night, this great old thing with its pulse in the stones, patient and present and interested. He picked up his quill and wrote back to Ragnarok. Everything. He folded the letter. He handed it to the Gringotts owl that had been waiting with the patience of its employer's culture, and the owl took off through the hall with the gravity of institutional purpose, and Harry watched it go and then turned back to his breakfast and ate with the appetite of someone who had slept well and had a full day ahead. At the high table, Dumbledore looked at his own breakfast. He was not unaware of Harry watching the owl go. He was not unaware of anything in this hall, which he had occupied for 40 years and knew as well as any place on earth. He looked at the 11-year-old boy who had walked into the mirror room prepared and come out clean, who had spoken to Voldemort and not flinched, who had looked at him, Albus Dumbledore, Order of Merlin, Transfiguration Champion, Defeater of Grindelwald, and said, "I don't think you do yet, but you will," with the calm certainty of someone making an accurate prediction. He had built a plan across 11 years. He had built it with care and foresight and the specific ruthlessness of a man who believed the ends were sufficiently enormous to justify the means. He had put 15 shackles on a child and placed the child in a house of deliberate unhappiness and arranged a contract for his death and told himself it was necessary and found ways to live with that. He had been wrong. Not about Voldemort. Not about the darkness. Not about the need for someone to stand against it and the cost of that standing. He had been wrong about Harry. About what Harry was, and what Harry needed, and what Harry would become when you stopped managing him and started letting him exist. He had looked at an infant and seen a function. And the function had grown up. He sat with his breakfast cooling and thought, with the exhausting honesty of a very intelligent man coming to a difficult conclusion, that the war ahead was going to be fought by people who had not asked to fight it and who were going to fight it their own way regardless of what he planned, and that his most useful role from this point forward was considerably smaller and considerably more humble than the role he had written for himself. He was not finished. He was not reformed. He was not, in the private honesty of his own mind, fully convinced that everything he had done was wrong. Some of it had been wrong, some of it had been the only choice available, and the work of sorting those categories was going to take time he wasn't sure he had. But the boy at the Slytherin table, eating breakfast with the ease of someone exactly where he was supposed to be, was not going to wait for him to finish sorting. That was, Dumbledore thought, probably the correct outcome. At the Slytherin table, Harry finished his eggs, drank his juice, and looked at the day ahead with the clean, purposeful clarity of someone who has been freed from every chain that was ever put on them and has spent 3 years learning what to do with the freedom. He had 11 years of school. He had Neville and Hermione and, slowly, Draco. He had Sirius in the Scotland House and Ragnarok in the Deep Bank and Griphook with his notebook and McGonagall sitting with a decision she'd made that she wasn't going back on. He had his father's journal and his mother's letter and 14 months of memories still arriving in pieces, small and real and his. He had the river. He had the deep channel under everything, the unclassified thing that was still announcing itself slowly, the resonance and the memory site and the elemental pole, and underneath all of it the depth that had no name yet but that he was going to name himself, on his own terms, in his own time. He had everything that had always been his and that was finally, completely, irreversibly his. He picked up his bag. Stood up. Walked out of the great hall and into the day. The castle was awake around him, the magic in the stones humming that deep familiar note, and for one moment, brief, physical, absolutely certain, he felt it respond to his presence with something that the resonance translated as, yes. There you are. Here I am, Harry thought back. And he kept going.